The story begins on a frozen battlefield littered with bodies as a white dove lands on the hilt of a sword. Up close, a bird watches everything with a strangely attentive gaze. This dove is nothing in the face of such a freezing scene. Down below in the snow, a young warrior takes a deep, relieved breath. This is our main character, a few years down the line. He's a knight in golden armor with blonde hair. He faced an entire horde of gigantic, brutal orcs all by himself. His blade reflects the souls of the monsters he has eliminated. Turns out, this sword has lived through countless eras and tribulations. It has been present in numerous wars and bloody battles throughout its lifetime. And because of this, many heroes were born to wield the legendary weapon. The sword has always existed at the center of all these great conflicts. Thus, one particular sword became known as the Demon Sword, Gruen. Our MC is now the current wielder of this cursed blade. Because of this cursed blade, he walked the lonely path of a true monster. And once again he was destroying monsters with his incredible skills. Even with his overwhelming abilities, the monsters wouldn't surrender and continued to march against him. In response, an entire horde of monsters appeared, with a powerful orc commanding them. Our MC calmly raised his cursed blade, and like a true knight, he unleashed his delicate, bluish aura. Like Goku powering up his ki, he shattered the ground around him with his energy alone. His blue eyes, with a touch of sky blue, reflected his energy. Then, he focused on his breathing. In an instant, everything on the battlefield falls silent. His energy, which had spread across the battlefield, touched a wounded soldier. He rose and picked up his trumpet, sounding it. And just like that, all his once defeated friends and comrades were back on their feet to join him in that battle. The orc horde could no longer worry just about that overwhelming aura, but now about more soldiers as well. During that great war, a winter's poem is sung. While titles of heroes and kings meant nothing on that battlefield, only the cruel law of the strongest remained. Our MC smiled and charged toward his enemies, completely confident. Our MC and his allies fight together. He remembers that everyone there were his great comrades in arms. They were his teachers and also his disciples at the same time. One of them was a skilled swordsman with long, white hair. Another companion used a shield and charged forward without any fear. And the girl of the group forged her own legend, starting right beside him. She sliced through the monsters with impressive speed. Our MC remained standing thanks to the legacy he could carry from them. But the orc leader wasn't there to play games. With thundering steps, that giant orc was determined to eliminate our hero. The creature raised its enormous axe while roaring so loudly it shook the ground. However, our hero calmly just unleashed his aura once more. Then he brandished his blade. And with that simple cut, our hero sliced that enormous orc in half. Thus, he defeated his enemy once again. With the battle won, our protagonist gives a confident smile, for victory was achieved. From that point on, the legend of him and his sword would become a myth for future generations. What no one knew was that the sword was actually a person who had been reincarnated as a weapon. For hundreds of years, this blade lived through countless stories and battles. In this way, it met various masters and turned them all into heroes who left their mark. Until one day the sword finally met its dearest friend. He was just a boy born in a nameless, rural village called Leonberg. Even though he was a simple boy, he had no fear of facing the monsters in the region. Together, the sword and the boy traveled the entire world in search of great adventures. With this, they accomplished feats that no one in the world could ever hope to match. Their journey eventually led them to frozen mountains fraught with danger. Soon after, they faced challenges that tested the very limits of their power. Even though he was exhausted, Leonberg had no intention of giving up the fight. He just knelt for a brief moment to catch his breath and continue, for before him stood a gigantic dragon, and the battle was far from over. The dragon roars furiously, unleashing a pink energy. Despite looking like a skeleton, Leonberg stands firm for the fight. The creature fires a massive beam of energy in his direction. Because of this, the sword Gruhan reacts and releases its own bluish aura. Faced with the situation, Leonberg stands up and the two energies collide. With a smile on his face, Leonberg calls upon the sword for the final battle. And so, they once again unleash their powerful energy. His face shows pure determination with his companion the blade. In a swift movement, he cuts through the air, leaping toward the dragon. High above, he brandishes his blade for his final strike. The blade cuts through the scales of the white dragon from the ice mountains. After everything, Leonberg became the sovereign of a great nation. Meanwhile, the sword became a legend known as the Dragon Slayer. Leonberg asked Gruhan to look after his descendants, passing it down through his lineage. And so, the sword's consciousness returns to the present after reminiscing about its grand past. Our MC is snapped out of his memories by an annoying noise. He wonders what's going on. Suddenly, he feels dizzy as someone shakes him with great force. Gruon gets irritated, wondering who dares to do this. An arrogant voice shouts that from now on, he is the new owner of the sword. Apparently, it's a spoiled prince. Faced with the situation, the guards try to stop the young noble. They pled with him to return the sacred weapon to its place. Our protagonist is in shock to hear that his new master is a prince. The fat kid yells at the guards, saying he can touch whatever he wants. He doesn't care about the kingdom's rules. Gruon can't believe the pathetic scene this pudgy brat is causing. Because of this, he decides to use his judgment skill to analyze the boy. A purple aura immediately envelopes the blade. The screen reveals the boy's name as Idrian Liamberg. He is 16 years old and full of horrible flaws with no aptitude whatsoever. Gruon is shocked to see that his friend's descendant is a complete good. For nothing, Idrian can barely hold the sword. The prince thinks that with the legendary sword in hand, no one will be able to look down on him anymore. Our protagonist thinks the kid is a complete, pathetic idiot who's just spouting a bunch of nonsense. Idrian begs the great dragon slayer to lend him its power, but the sword refuses to help a guy like him. Desperate, the young noble screams the sword's name with all his might. From there, the boy starts swinging the sword with no control at all. All the servants are terrified by the dangerous scene. Idrian yells at the guards to shut up and not give him orders. With that, he loses his balance while saying that with Gruon's power, no one will underestimate him. In this moment of fury, the boy completely loses his balance and starts to fall forward. Faced with the situation, he looks at the blade, not understanding what's happening. A moment later, the sword accidentally pierces his body. All the servants and guards are utterly desperate at the unexpected scene. One of the maids is so horrified she can barely believe what her eyes are seeing. While the prince is on the ground, the guards quickly shout for a royal physician. Our protagonist is confused, since the boy was the one who got hurt by the blade. From there, his vision suddenly starts to get blurry and fuzzy. For the first time in his long life as a sword, our protagonist was about to pass out. Turns out, with Idrian on the throne, the kingdom would have no future, as he had no talent. He was just a lazy and violent pig known as the first prince. He was like a dark cloud, but after the accident, strange rumors began to surface. The maids comment that Prince Idrian has been acting different and isn't causing trouble like before. They gossip, saying the prince must be embarrassed. Another thinks he's just being quiet out of fear and will soon be back to normal. But in reality, Prince Idrian couldn't care less about these rumors. Our protagonist is in shock for having eliminated his friend's descendant and taken his body. Suddenly, a maid announces that His Majesty the King has arrived. She asks him to hurry and fix his clothes to receive him. Our protagonist complains about why that man would show up now. He didn't even visit when he was unwell. And the maid warns him to be careful. The young woman asks him to watch his words. A stern-looking man appears behind her, making the girl nervous. The white-haired man comments that he heard he came back from the brink. But it seems his rotten personality is the same as always. He dismisses the maid, saying His Majesty doesn't expect much from him. Our protagonist wonders who this fellow is. With that, the man asks if he's going to pretend not to know him, even though they have a master-disciple relationship. Our protagonist makes a disgusted face and wonders if this man is this pig's master. Our protagonist says his memory is a mess. Maybe he remembers, maybe he doesn't, and the man is shocked by the response. At that moment, it's announced that His Majesty the King has arrived. Our protagonist turns and wonders if he's the king. From this, our protagonist deduces that this must be the kid's father. Looking closer, our protagonist notices that the king looks more decent than he expected. He thought the lion's blood had been mixed with a mutt's, but it seems that wasn't quite the case. The king says that facing your end doesn't change a person, as he doesn't even greet his own father. The master then informs His Majesty that the prince's memory is unstable, and everyone becomes worried. From there, we see the prince lying in his bed while a physician carefully examines him. The physician reports to the king that he can't find anything physically wrong with His Highness. He suggests it might be a temporary symptom due to a major psychological shock he suffered. The king mutters about the memory loss, and our protagonist wonders if he suspects something. With a disdainful look, the king finds the whole story very convenient for his son. He yells, asking if he thinks everything he's done will simply disappear with amnesia. The king lectures that sometimes people make mistakes, but they can learn from them so as not to repeat them. But he gets angry and yells at his son, saying that he simply forgot everything he did. Because of that, since everything was erased, he hasn't taken a single step away from his past. He shouts that his son will never change, while a guard asks His Majesty to calm down. Our protagonist thinks about the mess he's gotten himself into, as he's not even being treated like a human. He gets irritated and wonders what on earth the original kid had been doing with his life. Suddenly, the master calls him by the name of Ein, and our protagonist is completely shocked. All of a sudden, a woman with a crown hugs him tightly and says she heard the news about his memory. She squeezes him so hard he can barely breathe while saying that the past doesn't matter. The lady says his handsome face looks worn out, and our protagonist wonders where he looks worn out. Even so, the woman smiles with relief and says she's happy he has finally opened his eyes. With that, she advises him to never touch dangerous objects like that sword again. The woman hugs him even tighter, and our protagonist continues with a look of pure discomfort. She says she doesn't even want to imagine what could have happened, but our protagonist thinks her son was already a goner. Faced with that situation, he just finds the whole thing very strange and awkward. She says goodbye and says she'll visit him again, finally leaving our protagonist in peace. He lets out a weary sigh after that whole scene with the boy's mother. Our protagonist feels guilty because his friend asked him to look after his descendants. But since it happened, he decides he will live a good life for the both of them from now on. He remembers that he was reincarnated as a sword and spent his entire life cleaning up after others. Even if the body is fat and talentless, he decides he will build his strength anew. After all, he knows what he's capable of, having trained countless legendary heroes over time. With that, our protagonist decides he first needs to forge a mana heart. Right after, he begins to draw in all the magical energy around him. A powerful bluish aura envelopes his body as he tries to form a mana core. All the energy condenses into a small sphere of pure power in the center of his chest. But suddenly, the mana around him starts to become completely unstable and agitated. Our protagonist is confused because the process isn't working as it should. It turns out the mana dispersed because the boy's body can't accept it. Without letting it get to him, he prepares to try the process once more with more force. With great determination, he tries his absolute best to succeed this time. Again, he tries to force all that energy to stabilize inside his body. Soon after, he collapses to the floor, completely exhausted and out of breath. Our protagonist screams in frustration, wondering what the problem is with this body. He simply can't understand why his plan keeps failing miserably. He laments that if he were in a better body, he could force the mana inside without any problems. At that exact moment, a person enters the room and asks for His Highness's leave. The maid says it's a tonic sent by the queen, and that it's very beneficial for the body. With that, the young woman asks him to please consider Her Majesty's sincerity. The woman is clearly nervous about the situation and hopes for the best. She remembers how the original prince was a complete jerk and always threw things at her. Suddenly, our protagonist's eyes widen as he notices something different about that tonic. Before his eyes, he sees that the bowl is emanating a mana aura. Without a second's hesitation, our protagonist grabs the bowl from the tray, surprising the maid. Right after, he drinks the entire contents in one go without complaining about the taste. The maid is completely shocked and speechless at the prince's attitude. He then places the empty bowl on the tray and tells the young woman to leave the room. As soon as the maid leaves, he prepares to try the process once again. From there, he concentrates and thankfully, the bluish energy begins to form. But the amount of mana is still insufficient and would disperse after a single day. Because of this, he calls the maid back before she completely leaves the room. Our protagonist then points to the tray and asks if she has any more of that drink. A few days pass, and he finally manages to gather a good amount of mana. With a victorious smile, our protagonist feels ready for the next step. From there, he declares that he can finally create a mana heart in this body. He boasts that this is something he's done countless times, and could do with his eyes closed. But suddenly, his confident expression completely vanishes from his face. An overwhelming pain hits his chest, and he screams in desperation, not understanding. At that moment, he remembers that his former masters also felt their bodies burn. Because of this, he understands that as a sword, he never felt the pain for real. He finally realizes that creating a mana heart has always been a painful process. Even with the agony, he knows he can't lose consciousness, no matter what. Because if he passes out there, the mana will go wild and blow everything up. Faced with the situation, he breaks into a cold sweat but strives to maintain total focus. Kneeling on the floor, he concentrates with all his might so as not to give up. With that, he grabs hold of the wild mass of mana that tries to escape his control. With no rush, he slowly begins to guide the energy along the path to the heart. With great effort, he molds the energy and infuses it into his new mana heart. Our protagonist remains completely focused so that nothing gets out of control in the process. With a look of pure determination, he feels that the procedure is almost at an end. Kneeling on the floor, he finally smiles in relief as everything worked out in the end. He feels proud because he didn't create a heart for someone else, but one that is entirely his own. With a shout of joy, our protagonist celebrates his great achievement. He is thrilled to finally have his own power core after so long. But suddenly, his celebration is interrupted by something totally unexpected. A strange status window appears out of nowhere right in front of him. He recognizes that panel, as it was the same one he used to send to his masters when he was a sword. Right after, several messages appear, stating that some of his old authorities have been restored. Our protagonist is confused by the term authorities, and looks out the window. From that moment on, his vision becomes incredibly sharper than before. He can see every detail of the leaves on that tree with perfection. But he also notices that his hearing is strange and can't understand why. From there, he can hear the maids gossiping outside the door. Suddenly, he feels a sharp pain and the status window warns that his mana has run out. Our protagonist finally understands what the term, extremely limited, really meant. He remembers that when he was a sword, his senses were absolute and nothing escaped him. For now, he can only use a little mana to eavesdrop on conversations or see a little better. But he smiles confidently, knowing that everything will change once he expands his mana capacity. With this new goal in mind, our protagonist prepares for his next steps. Right after all that effort, his stomach rumbles, and he realizes he's very hungry. A maid rushes to attend to him while our protagonist focuses on adapting to the human body. At that moment, the queen appears with a smile on her face, praising him for his attitude. She pinches his cheeks and says, he has finally learned to take care of his own body. Meanwhile, another person enters the room and interrupts their conversation. The queen asks if he recognizes the man, but our protagonist says he doesn't. Faced with the situation, she asks her brother to help the boy, since he's lost his memory. Our protagonist realizes that this is the queen's brother, and the man says he will help his nephew. The man scoffs, saying his past wasn't anything great, and our protagonist realizes his uncle doesn't like him one bit. With a serious expression, our protagonist interrupts him to make one thing very clear between them. He glares at his own belly, and the uncle says he's only going to help him lose all that excess weight. The man warns him not to have any silly expectations, and our protagonist thanks him anyway. Faced with that whole conversation, our protagonist is completely confused by the situation. From there, the uncle stares at him with a stern look and prepares to begin the training. Without warning, he throws our protagonist to the ground with brutal force, knocking the wind out of him. He warns that from now on, everything he does requires his permission, and to forget the life of a prince. The uncle smiles and says if he tries hard, maybe he'll teach him a secret family move. Our protagonist is furious at having to hear such nonsense from him, of all people, the one who trained the founding king. The man mocks him upon seeing his fat jiggle, and says he must be quite frustrated with everything. With that, our protagonist gets up and faces his uncle to propose a bet between the two of them. He declares that in 6 months, he will make his uncle acknowledge him, and that he will shatter that arrogant look on his face. With a confident smile, he says that if he fails, he will do whatever his uncle says without complaint. But if he wins, his uncle will have to grant him one wish. And the man finds it all very interesting. The uncle accepts the bet, and says that at least this way, he'll have something to entertain himself with his nephew. Our protagonist spoke with confidence, but his body is already completely out of breath. He gets frustrated because this pig's carcass can't handle the slightest physical effort. Faced with the situation, a powerful bluish aura begins to form around his feet. He decides to use his mana to burn off all the fat and begin the training for real. Upon seeing the energy, the uncle is completely shocked and wonders if the boy managed to do it. Without a second thought, he runs and grabs our protagonist by the shoulder in total disbelief. Our protagonist just stares at him with a calm expression as the mana flows through his body. The uncle shouts in desperation and asks if he really managed to create a mana heart. With a smirk, our protagonist asks if he's referring to that energy. He shows the power in his hand and asks if his uncle already regrets the bet they made. The man ignores the taunt and asks what he was thinking when he created that. He yells, wanting to know where the boy learned that method, and says he doesn't even realize his mistake. Our protagonist is completely confused by his uncle's over-the-top reaction. The uncle then reveals that the mana heart is a cheap technique used by low-level mercenaries. Our protagonist shouts in shock, unable to believe that information. He panics and breaks into a cold sweat, thinking his world has just ended. The uncle reaffirms that the technique is low-level and used by common mercenaries. Our protagonist's expression is one of pure astonishment, not understanding the situation at all. He asks what his uncle is talking about, but the man says it'll be faster to show him. Right after, the uncle prepares himself, and a powerful mana aura begins to envelop him. Our protagonist notices that his mana has the shape of a ring, and becomes very curious. From there, the man attacks a training dummy with a massive energy strike. The display of power completely demolishes the training dummy in front of him. The uncle explains that the mana chain is more stable and easier to use than the mana heart. He says that a famous family that used the mana heart went bankrupt 100 years ago. Reading a book, our protagonist realizes thems have really changed a lot. The book says that mages use circles while knights use chains to gather mana. Thus, a knight's level is measured by the number of chains he can create. With this, the power is divided into single, double, triple, quadruple chain, and the penta level. Our protagonist slaps the book on the table and concludes that the technique isn't completely absurd. Right after, he reads the name Altringen and feels like he's heard it somewhere before. Suddenly, an old memory surfaces in his mind, and he finally remembers everything. It turns out that a long time ago, when he was still a sword, a man came to challenge him. That fellow introduced himself as Ernest Altringen and wanted to see who was more worthy of the title of Sword Saint. Back in the present, our protagonist smiles, now knowing why the name was familiar. He gets curious and wonders what happened to that fellow after all this time. The next day, he's already outside, stretching in front of his uncle and the knights. The uncle then approaches and asks if he managed to read the book he was given. The man says he must have understood the situation and the foolish choice he ended up making. Our protagonist just smiles ironically and says it really is the end of the world. With a confident smile, he crosses his arms and asserts that he doesn't think he made any mistake at all. The uncle gets annoyed and asks if he won't admit his mistake, or if he still doesn't understand the situation. To answer, our protagonist just summons his blue mana heart into the palm of his hand. He then asks if his uncle has ever heard of the expression, class difference, as he releases his aura. The uncle is completely confused and asks what on earth he's talking about. He says there were mercenaries who thought they were heroes hundreds of years ago. But they were all defeated because they couldn't even get past 2 rings of power. With a smile, the uncle challenges the boy to defeat a double chain knight. If he succeeds, the man promises he will become his guardian, as his mother wishes. Our protagonist smiles and wonders if it's a good thing to have his uncle as a guardian, but says he doesn't know. At that moment, a knight prepares himself in the courtyard for the great skill test. Suddenly, the uncle stumps his foot hard and asks if he dares to question his qualifications. He unleashes his aura and introduces himself as the Count of the Kingdom and Commander of the Northern Army. In addition, he is also the Master of the Black Dragon and one of the King's 5 silver lions. His energy reveals that he is a powerful knight who has managed to weave 4 rings of power. With a serious look, he reveals himself to be a powerful quad-chain knight. He shouts that his name is Bael Valorhard, and this is the man standing beside him. Bael then asks if that's qualification enough as he pressures him with his energy. Faced with that demonstration, the double chain knight moves forward to begin the test. The double chain knight readies himself, but our protagonist stops him. He shouts for Bael to get out of the way, because he will fight him himself. With an ironic smile, Bael seems to like his nephew's attitude. He's curious to see what the boy will do. Our protagonist stares him down with a defiant look. He warns his uncle not to go back on his word later. Sometime later, the training ends disastrously. Our protagonist is on the ground, exhausted, asking for a break. Back in his room, he can barely stand. His hands tremble with fatigue as he leans on a table. His face pale with exhaustion. He complains that he almost kicked the bucket. That fat body really couldn't take the heat. He remembers Bael's words during training. His uncle mocked him, saying he could barely beat a single chain knight. Our protagonist imagines himself walking all crooked down the hallway. He curses his uncle in his thoughts, calling him a demon. Peeking through the door, he sees a man waiting patiently for him. He wonders who that person could be. The man bows and introduces himself as the court physician. He's surprised that His Highness still remembers him. Faced with the situation, the physician explains why he's there. The queen ordered him to come and use healing magic. Right after, the man prepares a green energy sphere with a strange smile. Our protagonist screams in desperation, "No!" He bellows that he doesn't need healing and tells the physician to get out. His effort in training couldn't be wasted. With that, the physician is forcefully thrown out of the room. Our protagonist complains, asking if they're trying to undo his hard work. The knight observing him remains silent. His expression shows he's confused by the prince's reaction. Suddenly, a young man with brown hair appears at the door. He calls out for his brother, surprising everyone with his arrival. The young man has an arrogant smile and crosses his arms. He seems very self-confident with that whole pose. Meanwhile, our protagonist is eating at a table. He seems quite irritated by the unexpected visit from that guy. With his mouth full, he wonders who this guy is. His expression shows he's not the least bit happy with the visit. The knight whispers that he is the third prince. Our protagonist is confused as he didn't remember having a brother. His brother says he looks well after the accident, but says that's actually a great shame for him. Not paying him any mind, our protagonist asks what he wants. He says a prince shouldn't have time for petty squabbles. The brother gets furious and calls him an idiot. He mocks the accident with the sword that almost cost him his life. Soon after calming down, the prince says he heard some interesting news. Our protagonist continues eating without much care. He mentions the bet his brother made with Count Bale, and also talks about the fight against the double chain knight. With a wicked smile, he seems to have a plan in mind. That look doesn't bode well for our hero. From there, he offers to be the opponent in the bet. He wants to fight his own brother to humiliate him. After the crazy proposal, the prince leaves the place. Our protagonist is left speechless by the guy's audacity. Our protagonist explodes with anger, wondering who that guy was. He doesn't understand how the descendants are so strange. The knight explains that he was Prince Gillian. He is known for his talent with the sword, and our protagonist doubts it. The knight continues, saying Gillian formed 2 rings at 14. Because of this, he's very fast, and our protagonist doesn't seem to care. Suddenly, a maid appears and asks for His Highness's leave. She seems nervous and says she's very sorry to have to interrupt the conversation. The young woman holds a tray piled high with letters with great difficulty. With a trembling voice, she announces that the mail has arrived for him. Our protagonist picks up one of the letters, completely confused. He wonders why everyone suddenly seems interested in him. With a very suspicious look, he starts to think about the real reason. This whole situation seemed extremely suspicious and way too sudden. Sitting at his desk, he starts opening all the letters. He still can't understand what on earth is happening there. All the letters basically apologize for what happened, and they also offer to be his training partner if he needs one. In short, all of this was a perfect, legitimate opportunity. A chance to give the bully prince a good thrashing without punishment. With a wicked smile, he realizes the situation he's gotten himself into. He understands that a great opportunity has opened up right in front of him. From there, he calls the maid who is still standing there. The young woman responds, a little scared by the prince's call. With a confident smile, he tells the girl to write down everyone's name, all those who sent one of those letters to him that day. The next day in the training yard, a wooden sword is thrown. It lands with a dry thud on the ground right in front of him. Our protagonist stares at the sword, not understanding what's happening. He wonders what his uncle's plan is this time. Bale appears out of nowhere and tells him to pick up the sword from the ground. The order is very direct and leaves no room for questions. The uncle explains that he needs to know the basics of swordsmanship. He doesn't want to hear any excuses after the bet is lost. Our protagonist picks up the wooden sword from the ground. He complains that his uncle could have handed it to him instead of throwing it. Suddenly, he feels a twinge of pain in his body. He's startled as he didn't expect to feel that after training. The sharp pain runs through all his muscles at once. He screams and realizes that something is very wrong with his body. Seeing this scene, Bale looks at him suspiciously. He then asks if, by any chance, the boy didn't receive the healing magic. Our protagonist is confused by his uncle's question. Bale says that as a knight, he should know the answer well. The uncle explains that healing magic prevents muscle growth. It only restores the body to its original state from before. With a serious look, he confirms that he's right. Our protagonist understands that dismissing the physician was the correct decision. From there, Bale says that's not what he wanted to talk about today. He just turns around and prepares to begin the real lesson. The man warns him to pay close attention to his movements. He doesn't intend to show the technique to his nephew many times. Right after, he demonstrates the kingdom's sword technique. This is the foundation that all knights learn in training. His uncle's blade glows with a sharp, bluish energy. The movements he makes are extremely fast and precise. Bale's gaze is completely focused on his demonstration. Every detail of his posture shows his great mastery of the weapon. With impressive speed, he executes several cuts. The energy from his sword leaves a trail of light wherever it passes. His movements are so fast they look like a blue blur. He moves with an agility that doesn't seem human in any way. He finishes the sequence with a powerful and very elegant strike. The demonstration makes it clear just how skilled he really is. With his blade raised, he concludes his display of power. The bluish energy around him shows his great mastery. Right after, he executes a powerful downward strike. The movement is so fast it can barely be followed by the eyes. The impact of the strike creates a shockwave that cracks the ground. The force of that simple movement is truly impressive. Faced with that scene, our protagonist is completely shocked. He didn't expect his uncle to be so skilled with the sword. He then asks if that technique was really just the basics. He can barely believe that knights learn something like that. With a serious look, Bale stares at him without saying a single word. His expression already said everything the boy needed to know. He explains that the training sword isn't sharp, but it's perfect for learning the fundamentals of the kingdom's swordsmanship. Suddenly, he stops talking and looks to the side. He wonders what that strange noise he just heard was. Our protagonist starts laughing uncontrollably. He finds it unbelievable that after so long, that technique has become a joke. He remembers the legendary swordsmanship that took down the Mad Dragon. That was the true and powerful technique of the Dragon Slayer. To think that that skill was now treated as basic training, that was an insult to the history he himself had built. Bale says that with just the basics, he won't win the bet. He suggests the boy ask his mother to find another master, but our protagonist refuses the offer on the spot. He says he doesn't need to learn any other swordsmanship technique. The uncle is visibly surprised by his nephew's response. He can't understand the boy's sudden confidence. Faced with the situation, he just tells the boy to do as he pleases. Our protagonist then grips the hilt of the sword firmly. From there, he begins to swing the sword with all his might. The movement is clumsy but filled with a strange determination. He tries to imitate the strike his uncle just showed. The reason the Dragon Slayer technique became basic training is simple. Our protagonist understands that this is a natural phenomenon, even if he hates to admit this sad reality. It turns out that the current technique lacks the will to slay dragons. It's missing the essence that made the skill a true legend. Those who abandoned the mana heart and forgot the will, they would never have the eyes to see the true value of that technique. Back in the present, our protagonist tries the move once more, but his strike is weak and lacks the impact it should have. Bale approaches and points out the error in his combat stance. He notices that his nephew isn't using his strength correctly. He explains that putting force only into the arms is useless, and asks if the boy has already forgotten the demonstration he just gave. With the tip of his sword, he pokes the boy's stomach. He warns him to put his core strength into the strike for it to work. Next, he also pokes his leg with the wooden blade. The strike needs to come from the entire body, not just one isolated part. Bale explains that the force must flow through his entire body. Only then will he be able to swing the sword correctly. With his head down, our protagonist finally understands what to do. He knows his uncle is completely right about all of it. Even though his current body is weak and very clumsy, he is determined to imitate the legendary Dragon Slayer. He will prove to everyone that this technique is not trash, and he will show the true and overwhelming power it hides. From there, the days of intense training finally begin. He runs around the courtyard nonstop to strengthen his weak body. A week passes and our protagonist continues to train hard with his wooden sword. In addition to physical training, he also dedicates himself to accumulating mana in his body. After a whole month of pure effort, he is exhausted but has no intention of giving up. With that, a status window appears, saying he has managed to change his constitution. Because of this, the clumsy trait has disappeared, and the effect of his exercise has greatly increased. A powerful bluish energy flows through him, showing his great progress with mana. His constitution has changed, and the mana sensitivity disorder has finally disappeared forever. Now he swings the sword much more naturally than a month ago. With each passing day, he feels stronger than the day before. With a determined smile, he seeks perfection in every move he makes. Suddenly, an angry voice shouts, telling him to stop the training immediately. The boy's strike breaks our protagonist's wooden sword into several pieces. In the rain, he faces the mysterious knight while Bale just watches the scene. Because of the impact, our protagonist's hand starts to bleed a lot. His blood drips onto the wet ground as tension rises between the two. Our protagonist looks to the side and asks if that's really his uncle. His eyes show an unshakable determination, even under that heavy rain. He remembers a lightning bolt striking the training dummy right in front of him. That lightning was so powerful that it completely destroyed the wooden target. Startled, he felt a strange sensation run through his entire body. Bale yells at him, calling him an idiot for training on a day like this. Angrily, the uncle grabs him by the collar and stares at him with a furious look. His hand was completely injured from that intense training. A status window appears, saying he has awakened a new trait of super concentration. Faced with the situation, he just laughs, because his plan worked out in the end. He thinks that if he tries to concentrate again, he might end up being struck by lightning. Right after, he passes out, and Bale catches him as the knights rush to help. Bale stares at him with a serious and very worried look about his nephew's condition. As he faints, he hears his uncle calling him a stubborn, hard-headed fellow. Sometime later, our protagonist finally wakes up in his bed after all the effort. Our protagonist wakes up in his room and wonders if he ended up passing out during training. With a hand on his head, he realizes he underestimated the limits of this weak body. He remembers that as a sword, he had already achieved every possible accomplishment by helping heroes. It turns out he guided wars to victory and walked the path of great warriors. His name was Gruhun, a wise counselor and an exceptional teacher to all. Even so, he was always just a third party, observing everything from a distance, unable to act. Because of this, he became intoxicated with the feeling of training and conquering everything on his own. At this rate, he knows his body will break, and he needs to find a balance. A month has passed, and he has accumulated enough mana for the next level. With constant effort, he finally managed to gather mana to a certain level. His bluish aura glows, and his body can now handle a little more power. Because of this, the status window informs him that his mana heart has expanded. From now on, his body is capable of supporting even more energy than before. His physical constitution changed because of his new and improved mana heart. With wide eyes, he feels the power flowing and is shocked by the result. With a cry of victory, our protagonist celebrates, for he has finally achieved what he wanted. From there, he turns to a sword and prepares to test his new power. Without a second's hesitation, he grips the blade firmly in his hands. As he swings the sword, a window appears, saying he can now use the basic level of aura. With a smile, his reflection appears on the blade, and he thinks that now he can do the basics for real. Back in the courtyard, Bale says that rumors are spreading, and our protagonist is confused. The uncle seems quite irritated and complains that the bet has become a huge nuisance for him as well. Our protagonist suggests it would be better to find a training partner soon to sort everything out. With a smile, he says he has already decided who his opponent in that fight will be. He explains that he wants to fight weaker knights first, and the uncle agrees with the plan. Right after, he turns and calls for a knight named Kars to ask about a request. Kars smiles and says he has organized the list of everyone who requested to fight His Highness. The knight hands over the list and asks if he really intends to fight those people. He warns that most of them hold a grudge, and might try something during the duel with him. Our protagonist smiles and says he knows that, and that's exactly why he chose them. Our protagonist asks his uncle to be the judge of the fights. Bale just stares at him with a serious expression, without a word. He says he's not asking for much. He just wants his uncle to ensure no one leaves there without their life at the end of the day. A few days later, the time for the first duel finally arrives, and a young man seems very determined for the fight ahead. He walks towards the first prince's palace, and thinks that this is the place where a complete piece of trash lives. His name is Taylor Tilheim. He is the second son of a common baron's family without much prestige. It turns out that a few years ago, the original prince was a complete jerk. He would point and mock everyone at a royal banquet. His father and his older brother suffered an unforgettable insult, all because of that disgusting and very arrogant prince. Because of this, his family's honor was dragged through the mud, and to this day, they are ridiculed by other nobles in the region. Filled with hatred, he swears he will make Adrian pay for everything today. He will finally have his long-awaited revenge. He introduces himself as a single chain knight, and also as the heir to the Talheim family's swordsmanship. Our protagonist scoffs and asks if he's really a knight, because in his opinion, the young man seems too weak for the position. Taylor is furious with the prince's arrogance. He thinks the rumors about his personality were all true. Faced with the situation, Bale approaches and says that's enough. He understands the young man's feelings, but the duel hasn't even started yet. Suddenly, Taylor is completely speechless. He stares at the prince's uncle with an expression of pure admiration on his face. He bows and says it's the honor of a lifetime to meet him. Bale just replies that the pleasure is all his at that moment. Our protagonist comments that anyone would think his uncle was the prince there. Bale replies that he should have behaved better in the past, and our protagonist tells him to stop talking about it. The uncle then tells them both to take their positions and announces that the duel will finally begin. With swords crossed, the two face each other with a serious and determined look. From there, Taylor unleashes his single chain aura and prepares for the first attack. With a confident smile, he warns His Highness to be very careful with his movements. Right after, he charges forward with impressive speed towards our protagonist. The sound of clashing blades echoes throughout the training courtyard. The two exchange swift blows, and Taylor's bluish energy shines brightly in the fight. Our protagonist smiles and thinks his opponent has too many unnecessary moves. With a precise strike, he blocks Taylor's attack and stares at him with a superior look. Taylor is completely shocked to realize that it was a mana heart. Our protagonist pushes him back with surprising force, knocking him off balance. The young man shouts that a mana heart shouldn't be able to block a chain at all. With a smile, our protagonist says he only felt a slight tingle from the blow. Taylor is left confused, as the strength of a mana heart shouldn't be that great. Suddenly, the surrounding knights notice a strange sound coming from the young man's sword. Bale is in shock as he recognizes it as the legendary sword's cry, a rare feat. With that, our protagonist's weapon glows with a blue aura, and everyone finds it impossible. Even so, Taylor is not intimidated and charges with everything he has at his opponent. Our protagonist is surprised by the determination of the knight coming towards him. The blades clash with a great impact of energy that echoes throughout the courtyard. From there, a super fast exchange of blows begins between the two, with sparks flying. The collision of power is so intense that a large explosion of light occurs between them. Due to the force of the attack, our protagonist slides back from the impact of the blow. Even while being pushed back, he stands firm and faces his opponent with a serious look. He thinks that the mana of a ring is truly the opposite of the mana of a heart. Faced with the situation, he feels his mana about to go out of control at any moment. But he remembers that his opponent is the second son of Baron Teilheim and calms down. With a smile, he tells the young man to cool his head a bit, as he's too worked up. Our protagonist closes his eyes and focuses all his senses on a single point. From there, his mind plunges into a vast blue ocean of pure energy and power. With a determined look, he extends his hand and prepares to awaken his true power. He invokes the essence of the demon sword, which has been called by countless names. With that, he touches the blade, which is an inseparable part of his own soul. At that moment, the dormant will of the dragon slayer finally awakens within him. This is the memory and the essence of the heart that was forged only to eliminate dragons. A status window announces that the dragon slayer's heart has been successfully activated. Because of this, his eyes now glow with an intense and dangerous red light. He unleashes the true power of the sword forged with the sole purpose of killing dragons. The energy of his heart merges with the blade and creates a frightening dragon aura. Taylor is completely terrified and wonders what on earth that massive energy is. Faced with that dangerous scene, Bale shouts in desperation, ordering the duel to stop immediately. The uncle realizes the sword is too dangerous, but our protagonist just smiles maliciously. He remembers that before the fight began, he made a special request to his uncle Bale. With a smile, our protagonist says that if by any chance he looks like he's about to go over the line, then his uncle would have the obligation to stop him before something bad could happen. From there, Bale steps in front and blocks the strike with all his strength and power. The clash of the two energies creates a massive explosion that destroys the entire courtyard. Faced with the situation, Bale stands firm and manages to completely nullify the attack. After that whole demonstration, our protagonist collapses to the ground, completely exhausted. With the situation resolved, his uncle just sheathes his sword with a very serious expression. The other knights surround Bale and accuse him of attacking a member of the royal family. But our protagonist stands up and tells everyone to back off, as he was the one who asked for it. He wipes some blood from his mouth and says he really did ask his uncle to intervene, but he never told his uncle to go so hard as to nearly break all his bones. Right after, a bluish energy emerges from his chest and begins to stir unstably. Our protagonist complains that his mana heart almost shattered for real with that blow. He thinks Bale's power is on another level and that he felt the full impact. Fortunately, he gets up and realizes he didn't suffer any serious side effects in the end. With a victorious smile, our protagonist celebrates because everything worked out, and he still won the duel. Suddenly, a voice asks why he's smiling, leaving him completely surprised in bed. It turns out Bale has entered the room and asks what on earth he was thinking during the fight. The uncle yells about the sinister energy he used and says he never taught him that strange technique. Our protagonist calmly replies that he just stayed true to the blade's real essence. Bale doubts that answer coming from a boy who has never seen a real fight in his life. From there, he understands that the so-called essence of the sword is the pure intention to eliminate the opponent. Even though he finds it very crude, he admits that this is one of the many truths of swordsmanship. Our protagonist is surprised by the response, as he really didn't expect that from his uncle. He thought Bale would give him a lecture about the path of the sword and the perfection of technique. But Bale reveals he's not a knight, but a soldier who follows the path of victory at any cost. Faced with that revelation, our protagonist is a bit shocked by the man's words. However, Bale warns that his sword is excessive and that bloodlust can blind both friends and foes. Our protagonist replies that's exactly why they are training, to correct that flaw. With that, Bale says he will keep an eye out to see if he'll be devoured by his inner demon or not. 3 days of duels pass, and the dust in the training courtyard finally begins to settle. Our protagonist then faces the knight and calls him by the name of Taylor Talheim to talk. With a confident smile, he says the young man has worked very hard these past 3 days. After all, enduring a blade filled with pure killing intent was no easy task. He taunts him, saying the young man wanted to beat him, but got frustrated for not succeeding, which Taylor denies. At that moment, he turns to a maid and tells her to hand over the box she's holding. The young woman is confused by the request, but hands the wooden box to His Highness without question. He remembers hearing about something unforgivable the old prince did to the young man's family. With that, he hands over the box and asks the knight to take it to his father as an apology. From there, our protagonist says goodbye and wishes Taylor a safe journey back. He thinks he has no obligation to clean up someone else's mess, but since he used the young man, he decided to pay him. Soon, the prince's training duels became the hottest gossip in the entire kingdom. Everyone comments that his arrogance dug his own grave, and that he would soon be greatly humiliated. But the days passed, and the scandal everyone expected never really happened. It turns out that everyone who fought him says it was a misunderstanding, and that he is not a vile man. People don't understand what happened, and think the palace silenced everyone. But upon hearing this, our protagonist slams his hand on the table in anger and shouts that this won't happen. He yells that the young man is just embarrassed for losing the fight to him. With that, he curses the nobles as useless, but Bale says he can't talk. It turns out he gave a gift to one of the knights who fought with him. Right after, he threatened him to spread the word that it had been a great fight. With a confident smile, he thought the bad rumor would die down soon. But suddenly, our protagonist is surprised to hear something. A maid tells him that now they say he threatened people to lie. Our protagonist gets frustrated as his plan completely backfired. Faced with the situation, he just decides to train and ignores everything. From there, he returns to the courtyard and swings his sword with a bluish aura. His movements are fast, and the energy from his blade cuts through the air with power. He focuses entirely on honing his skills with the sword. With this, our protagonist strives his utmost to become even stronger. His blade glows with an intense bluish energy as he trains. With his mana heart active, our protagonist stays focused on his training. He asks Kars how many duels are left, and the knight says today is the last one. With a sigh of relief, our protagonist realizes that the apprentices no longer challenge him. But Kars warns that at least the final opponent is a real knight. She not only trained in her family's technique, but also joined in order to hone her sword skills. Our protagonist becomes interested upon learning she is an apprentice of the Iron Lion Order. The knight's name is Arwen Kurgayan, and she walks towards the training courtyard. The guards watch her and confirm her identity by the Iron Lion crest on her armor. She is known as the flower on the cliff, and the rose with thorns that has broken every man's heart. With firm and confident steps, she approaches the place where the duel will take place. The knights comment that she is stunning, and that the prince must have a lot of influence. The young woman continues walking with a serious expression, completely focused on her goal. Her gaze doesn't waver for a second as she prepares for the great challenge. Before her, one of the knights wonders if it wouldn't be funny if she beat the prince in front of everyone. It turns out the knight in question is Arwen Kurgayan, an apprentice from the famous Order of the Iron Lions. Our protagonist doesn't understand why someone so talented would want to duel with him. Kars says there was a misunderstanding, but our protagonist already figures the old prince started a fight. Impatiently, he calls a maid and asks what on earth he did in the past. The young woman gets completely nervous, and with a trembling voice, she can barely answer the question. With great fear, she finally reveals that His Highness insulted Arwen, and the young man is shocked. He explodes with anger and pulls his hair, yelling at the old prince for being a complete maniac. From there, the memory of what happened that day comes rushing back to his mind. The old prince, with a disgusting smile, approaches Arwen and invites her to be his servant. He tries to put his arm around her, but the knight stops him before he can touch her. Arwen then says that the order is not his property, and the prince becomes furious at her audacity. Because of this, he loses control and calls her an ugly thing in front of everyone. Back in the present, our protagonist remembers hearing a rumor about this story. He realizes it was all just a completely clueless pick-up attempt from a scoundrel. Our protagonist then faces Arwen and thinks it's impossible she called the old prince ugly. Arwen greets him and says it's been a while since they've seen each other. but he seems the same as always. Our protagonist jokingly replies that he has changed so much that his very essence is completely different. The knight gets serious, and he thinks this is all karma left by the old jerk prince. Suddenly, an important man arrives and is announced to everyone as Count Valorhard. The count stares at Arwen with a surprised expression and wonders who that young woman could be. Faced with the situation, she bows and introduces herself as an apprentice knight of the Order of the Iron Lions. With that, the count warns her to be careful, as the prince's sword is very dangerous and venomous. Our protagonist complains about the lack of neutrality, but the man simply ignores him without a care. From there, he tells them both to take their combat positions for the duel to finally begin. In the middle of the courtyard, the count readies himself and announces that the combat between the two will now begin. Right after, Arwen assumes her fighting stance and prepares for the first attack with her aura. With a confident smile, our protagonist is curious to see the skills of the Iron Lion's prodigy. In an instant, she charges towards him with impressive speed, her sword glowing. His eyes reflect the young woman's attack, and he admits her movements are quite decent for an apprentice. Without any difficulty, our protagonist blocks the attack, and the clash of energies echoes through the courtyard. Our protagonist feels his mana flowing in reverse. The force of the girl's blow is stronger than he initially expected. Arwen continues to press on with a completely focused gaze. She's not there to play games and wants to win this duel at any cost. With that, he is pushed back by the force of her attack. He can barely stay on his feet under all that pressure. From there, a super intense exchange of blows begins between the two. The blades clash with sparks flying all over the courtyard. Our protagonist notices that she is being carried away by his rhythm. He then decides that this is not enough for a real test. The knight continues to attack with her powerful bluish aura. Her movements are extremely fast and full of attack power. Faced with the situation, he activates the Dragon Slayer's heart. A sinister red aura envelopes his entire body at the same moment. Arwen's eye reflects all that red energy. She is completely shocked by that sudden and terrifying power. Right after, their two swords clash with a massive impact. His red energy completely dominates the fight they are waging. Because of this, Arwen is thrown back by the force of the blow. She can hardly believe the power he suddenly unleashed. Without a second thought, the girl tries to create some distance. She needs space to think of a new combat strategy. Breaking into a cold sweat, she wonders what kind of sword that is. The energy she felt was not normal at all for a knight. With a smile, he comments that not all single ring users are the same. He admits that she is on a very different level from the others he has faced. However, a status window suddenly appears in his vision. He can now use the judgment authority in a very limited way. With this, he analyzes Arwen and sees all her attributes. She is a prodigy with the sword and has great potential for the future. With a serious look, our protagonist realizes what that status window means. With a confident smile, he understands that he can use the ability on opponents weaker than are at the same level as him. Arwen readies herself with her bluish aura, and he knows she is the perfect opponent for a test. From there, he charges forward with his red energy, shouting that the real fight begins now. After an intense exchange of blows, both are completely exhausted and out of breath. Even tired, they face each other in the training courtyard, willing to continue the fight to the end. His blade rests on the ground for a brief moment as they catch their breath. Suddenly, the count interrupts the duel and says that's enough for today and that they will continue tomorrow. Our protagonist complains because he was about to finish the fight once and for all. But Arwen also says it's a shame because she was about to do the same thing to him. The two start arguing, wanting to continue the duel, and the tension rises between them. The count loses his patience and unleashes his aura, shouting for them both to stop immediately. Faced with the situation, he says it's already late and tells them both to receive medical treatment. Right after, a physician approaches with a healing sphere and says he will treat him quickly. Our protagonist makes a disgusted face because he knows that healing magic nullifies his training. Meanwhile, another physician approaches Arwen to heal her wounds as well. The knight just remains silent with a serious expression, completely focused on the duel. From there, the two turn and walk in opposite directions without saying a single word. Arwen runs with determination, vowing to herself that she will not lose that fight, no matter what. The duel between the two simply refuses to reach a definitive conclusion. The knights comment that it's already the third day of fighting and that they are very surprised by it all. One of them says he heard about Arwen's skill, but the prince is by no means falling behind. Everyone in the courtyard hopes that on this day, the outcome of the combat will finally be decided. Before another round, our protagonist smiles and says there's something he wants to say first. With an irritated look, Arwen asks if he's not going to try to apologize right now. She stares at him with her purple eyes and warns that she won't accept any apology from him. He understands that she wants to reclaim her pride with her own strength, but says it's nothing like that. With a mischievous smile, he says that since the fight is so intense, shouldn't there be a prize? He proposes that the loser grant the winner a wish, leaving the knights in shock. Faced with that unexpected proposal, Arwen just remains silent and seems to be thinking it over. The knights shout that the proposal is unacceptable for a member of royalty and ask him to take back his words. Our protagonist ignores the others and asks Arwen directly for her opinion on the bet. Arwen replies that as an apprentice loyal to the royal family, she wouldn't dare commit such disrespect. But with a confident smile, she says that if he allows it, she believes she is qualified to receive the reward. With his red aura activated, our protagonist agrees, saying she thought it through well. Next, he charges forward and shouts for her not to go back on her word after it's all over. The blades clash with a great impact as the red and blue energies face off. Arwen then executes a powerful horizontal slash with her sword, releasing a wave of energy. With a wicked smile and glowing red eyes, our protagonist prepares for the counter-attack. Soon after, he unleashes a massive vertical strike with his Dragon Slayer aura activated. The knight is shocked by his speed, and thinks he wasn't at this level the day before. A dragon of red energy appears behind him, and Arwen wonders if he was hiding his strength. From there, a high-speed exchange of blows begins, with both fighting with everything they have. The young woman manages to block one of the attacks, but the force of the blow puts her in a very difficult situation. The impact of the attack throws her back, creating a large cloud of dust and destroying the courtyard floor. Arwen is completely exhausted and breathless after that last devastating blow. With his red eyes glowing, our protagonist prepares the final attack to end the fight. The energies of the two clash with a massive impact, creating a huge explosion in the courtyard. Due to the force of the blow, Arwen's sword is thrown far away and falls to the ground. Faced with the situation, the knight falls to her knees, completely defeated by the outcome of the duel. The other knights are left wide-eyed, unable to believe that the prince actually won the fight. Even Bale is impressed with the skill his nephew demonstrated in that combat. Kneeling on the ground, Arwen mutters that it can't be, and that she doesn't believe she lost. Our protagonist then places his hand on his sword and celebrates, saying he won the bet. He approaches the defeated girl and faces her to claim the wish he won in the duel. With a victorious smile on his face, our protagonist prepares to reveal what he really wants. Without beating around the bush, he says he wants her for himself, leaving the knight completely shocked by the request. It turns out he wanted the position of personal escort knight for the first prince of the kingdom. Already in her new uniform, Arwen reports for duty and says she hopes to serve him well. Our protagonist receives her with a very arrogant air, but she soon realizes the rumors were false. From then on, Arwen began to watch our protagonist, running towards her every day to start training. She thought that contrary to the rumors, he wasn't lazy but a very hardworking man. Even under a heavy downpour, he continued training with his sword, not caring about the weather. Arwen and the other knights worry and suggest that he should stop because of the storm. Desperate, she shouts for His Highness to be careful, as continuing to train in the rain was too dangerous. Suddenly, a lightning bolt strikes the training dummy right in front of him, illuminating the entire courtyard. Our protagonist just smiles as if nothing happened and seems to have enjoyed the situation. Faced with that scene, Arwen is left completely speechless, with a tear of shock running down her face. At that moment, she had a feeling that His Highness would become a great person in the future. She then remembers when he chose her, and said he wanted her for himself after the duel. The other knights were shocked by the request, and found his proposal very indecent. For a moment, Arwen wondered if she hadn't misjudged him because of those words. But she composes herself and prepares to question the true intention behind that strange request. With that, she faces him and asks if that was really what His Highness desired of her. Our protagonist mocks her, saying she's just an apprentice who can't even beat a prince. With a confident smile, he says that what he really desires is the great potential and the future of a knight named Arwen Kurgan. He explains that he needs a knight who will follow him of her own free will, and not one who stands by his side just because of a royal order. He wants a knight who belongs only to him and who will fight by his side. From there, he uses his ability and sees that she truly has a great talent with the sword. With that, our protagonist makes the official invitation to the girl. He asks Arwen Kurgan to become his true knight. From there, her memory flashes back to the past and how she became a knight. She remembers that because of her appearance, no one treated her like a true warrior. Because of this, she trained harder than anyone to prove her worth to everyone. In a short time, she defeated all the other apprentices in her group, and with that, she became the victor in every fight she participated in. She surpassed all the other apprentices with her great skill with the sword. None of the other knights in training were a match for her power. And even after achieving incredible results with her skill, people still mocked her and didn't see her as a true knight. But suddenly, all of that was about to change forever. Back in the present, she asks if he really wants her potential and future as a knight. With a serious and determined look, she wants to know if his offer is truly sincere. From there, she says she accepts the invitation, but he needs to promise her one thing. With that, she asks him to treat her as a knight and not as a simple woman. She says if he does that, she will follow His Highness's will without question. The two stare at each other with a serious look, and a moment of great understanding arises between them. With a smile, our protagonist says it's all right and that he promises to honor the agreement. With the promise made, the young woman prepares to make her oath. Without a second's hesitation, she kneels before her new master and lord. With a smile, he accepts the oath of loyalty from Arwen, the eldest daughter of the House Kurgan. She offers her sword and the rest of her life to serve the prince with all her honor. Bale watches the whole scene in complete silence, without saying a single word. With her head bowed, the young woman prepares to receive the appointment from her new master. From there, he touches her shoulder with the sword and appoints her as his new knight. The news spreads, and while Arwen trains, some knights comment on the situation. They find it absurd that she would swear loyalty to a scoundrel, and even more so because of a bet. Soon after, they begin to speculate that there might be some kind of relationship between the two. Upon hearing the rumors, our protagonist explodes with anger and wonders if he's become some kind of villain. He complains that he's now become the scum of the earth, while Arwen just watches him in silence. The knight becomes thoughtful about the whole situation and decides to speak with her new master. With that, she approaches and calls him for a serious conversation about an important matter. The young woman asks about something he said, but our protagonist doesn't remember what she's talking about. She reminds him of his words about not wanting a knight who serves him only by royal order. Arwen asks if that was meant to hurt her, but he says that if a royal order called her, she would leave. He continues, saying that if necessary, she could even swear loyalty to someone else. The knight then asks if he would accept someone else's oath in place of hers. Without a second's hesitation, our protagonist responds with a resounding no and turns his back on her. He says that the knight Kars isn't fun to train with, and that's why he doesn't like him very much. Arwen laughs, and our protagonist says he wasn't joking and that he was serious. He gets a serious expression and says he really meant all of that. Suddenly, a letter arrives and says he is released from confinement for a royal banquet. Our protagonist is confused because he doesn't understand why his confinement ended a month and a half early. He remembers how the king locked him in the palace as if he never wanted to see him again. With that, he complains that he really can't understand what that man is thinking. He says he doesn't care because even if he leaves the palace, he has nowhere to go and no one to meet. Suddenly, the maid is startled to see something unexpected in one of the letters. She apologizes and says she accidentally saw an invitation addressed to His Highness. Our protagonist becomes curious and wonders what kind of invitation it could be. The young woman then hands him the invitation, and the letter has a very well-drawn crest. He opens the letter and reads that it's an invitation to an exclusive social club for young nobles. The maid explains that it's a social gathering that His Highness used to be a part of. Our protagonist asks if it's a strange place, and the young woman gets nervous, not knowing how to answer. The maid then remembers that the old prince was a complete womanizer and disgusting to everyone. With that, our protagonist crumples the letter and says he doesn't need useless meetings because he's busy training. But suddenly, something in that invitation catches his attention, and he stops for a moment. He notices that the letter was sent by a certain Bernardo of the House of Ely. Our protagonist finds the name familiar and wonders where he knows it from. He remembers his uncle mentioned this family once, because they fell from grace 100 years ago. Given this, our protagonist changes his mind and says it seems he should go after all, and the maid agrees. With a thoughtful look, he just hopes that family isn't in too miserable a situation. 4 months have passed since he started training and losing weight, and a tailor praises him. The new clothes are black with very minimal decorations, as the design is simple. The tailor says that even though it's simple, the suit maintains the dignity of a prince, and he looks great. The man comments that he's lost a lot of weight and his measurements have been cut in half. Our protagonist says he will also trust him with the banquet clothes, and the man gets excited. With a smile, he warns that his measurements will change again by the day of the banquet. A few days after the mourning period ends, he finally goes to the young master's social club. The carriage is escorted by knights, and our protagonist prepares for the social event. Inside the vehicle, he yawns and complains about how being a prince is a tiresome position. He complains about the clothes, the carriage, and the guards, as everything is very frustrating for him. Suddenly, something catches his attention, and our protagonist looks more carefully at the maid. The young woman sitting in front of him seems very nervous about the situation and doesn't know what to do. Our protagonist then notices a scar on the girl's neck and becomes very curious. The maid says it was entirely her fault, and that he had every right to punish her for the mistake. With that, he becomes furious, thinking about the urban legends the old prince keeps creating. He then realizes that he's been seeing this girl for months, but still doesn't even know her name. From there, our protagonist asks directly what her name is, surprising the young woman. The maid replies that her name is Adelia Bairn, and our protagonist is completely shocked. He recognizes the surname Bairn as a family that is barely listed in the register of nobles. A memory arises, and he remembers a distant past when various races lived on the continent. At that time, it was normal for weak humans to be hunted by other, stronger races. But after a long war, some heroes emerged to put an end to that tragic story. These saviors made humans the dominant species and became known as the Five Electors, and one of these 5 great heroes stood out among all the others. She was a red-haired woman who called our protagonist in his sword form by the name of Gruhan. With his blade in her hands, she looks at him and asks if he's ever thought about something important. Facing a horde of giants, she asks what the two of them will do after the war finally ends. Her yellow eyes shine with pure determination as she prepares for the great battle. Without wasting time, her blade strikes the ground with a completely devastating impact. With that, the warrior leaps into the air to face one of the giants from that enormous horde. The memory shows how she defeated the giant king and changed the history of humanity forever. Thus, she became known as the Marchioness of the Iron, Blooded Sword, the legendary Agnes Bairn. With a smile on her face, she feels satisfied with the outcome of that great and bloody battle. Before her, a battlefield is filled with the bodies of giants that she herself defeated alone. Her eyes glow with a golden light as she sees more enemies approaching her on the horizon. She shouts furiously at the monsters that keep crawling to try and attack her again. With her sword in hand, she charges forward to finish them all off once and for all, without mercy. The warrior screams in hatred and curses the giants for their horrible and disgusting actions. With that, she grips the sword firmly, and the blade glows with a bluish power. Back in the present, our protagonist pulls his hair and says just thinking about it makes his ears feel dirty. He then calms down and thinks that the girl is a descendant of the legendary Bairn family. Our protagonist wonders what on earth happened for her family to end up like that. Suddenly, a guard announces that they have arrived at their destination, and he seems quite irritated. The knight calls for him to get out, but our protagonist remains lost in his thoughts. He then gets out of the carriage and complains about the terrible timing of being interrupted like that. With firm steps, he walks towards the entrance of the social club without looking back. Before entering, he turns to Adelia and says he wants to talk with her later. The young woman is completely confused by the sudden request and doesn't understand what he wants. Right after, a young man with silver hair appears and greets him very enthusiastically. The fellow bows and introduces himself as Bernardo of the Ely family, paying his respects to him. Our protagonist looks at him and thinks the young man looks like a delinquent and doubts he's a noble. Bernardo, on the other hand, thinks about how difficult it must have been for the prince to get so thin. With a mischievous smile, our protagonist seems to have enjoyed meeting that fellow there. Bernardo asks if he's not feeling well, but the young man replies that it was good to have come. With that, he places his hand on Bernardo's shoulder and says that thanks to him, the day will be very pleasant. The silver-haired young man is left completely confused by that sudden attitude. Inside, some nobles tell exaggerated stories about their romantic conquests. One of them brags about how smooth a young lady's skin was, while she seems to enjoy the attention. From there, the group of nobles continues their feudal conversation in a luxurious room. Bernardo finds all of this very strange, as the prince would have been drunk by this point. But our protagonist just observes everything calmly with a glass in his hand, and the atmosphere seems different. At that moment, another noble approaches to speak with him. With a smile on his face, he says he heard a rumor about His Highness having obtained the flower of the Iron Lion. The young man comments that the rumor about the knight has already spread throughout the kingdom. Faced with that conversation, our protagonist just remains silent, without saying a single word. The noble complains that he was also eyeing that woman, and that the prince was faster. He then comments that she was already beautiful in armor, and that he can only imagine what she would look like without it. Our protagonist asks if the noble has a younger brother, and the young man confirms without understanding. He then says that's lucky, and Bernardo is confused, not understanding their conversation. The noble barely has time to ask why before our protagonist punches him in the face. With a serious look, our protagonist shows he's not kidding, and the punch is a direct hit. The young man is thrown back by the force of the attack, and doesn't understand what just happened. Seeing the scene, the noble falls to the ground, and one of the young ladies screams in desperation at the situation. All the other nobles are completely shocked by the prince's unexpected action. Bernardo is also stunned and can't believe what his eyes just saw there. With a wicked smile, he says it's lucky his family line won't be cut off. Right after, he kicks the noble with all his might without giving him time to get up. Everyone is terrified by the scene, and no one dares to interfere in the fight that started out of nowhere. With a cold look, he warns that from now on, the younger brother will be the heir to the family. Without wasting time, our protagonist already prepares to attack the next noble on his list. He lands a punch on another young man who was trying to flee, and throws him to the ground without any mercy. Amidst the chaos, the other guests are terrified, not knowing what to do to stop it. Bernardo tries to hold back one of the nobles, but the chaos is already completely out of control. With that, our protagonist grabs the young man's collar with all his might, without mercy. The noble screams in desperation and asks what on earth His Highness is doing in that place. With his face all bruised, he glares at our protagonist, who tells him to listen very carefully. He says he can tolerate them thinking of him as a scoundrel, but he won't be treated like one. Hearing that line, all the other nobles are completely confused, not understanding a thing. Because of this, our protagonist decides the young man needs another beating and attacks him again. The blow is so strong that the noble flies far and breaks everything in his path with the impact. All the other guests are terrified by the scene and just watch in great fear. The noble then passes out on the floor, completely defeated after that unexpected thrashing. From there, he calls for Bernardo, who kneels and responds with a voice trembling with fear. With a wicked smile, he reminds the young man that the day would be very fun for the two of them. Bernardo is terrified and wonders why this madman is suddenly acting this way. Our protagonist then tells the young man to go call the court knights immediately. Without a second's hesitation, Bernardo obeys the order and runs off to carry out the command. Amidst all that chaos, a young man tries to run away, but our protagonist glares at him. With a cold look and a few marks on his face, he observes the mess he has just created there. From there, he orders all the women to leave the place, and the nobles are terrified. One of the young men is completely paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do in that situation. His feet tremble, and he can't move a single inch from the fear he feels. With that, our protagonist glares at him and says he's sure he told the women to leave. He warns that the young man can leave if he wants, but if he does, he'll leave as a woman. Right after, he steps on the chest of a fallen noble, and everyone screams in terror at the scene. The other guests just watch everything in great fear, without the courage to do anything. He then explains that they didn't even bother to kneel and showed no respect. In addition, he remembers how one of the nobles mocked him right to his face without shame. And to make matters worse, they also insulted his personal knight right in front of him. With that, he turns to the guards and asks what charges can be applied in this case. One of the knights replies that since they disrespected royalty, it constitutes an insult. Faced with that serious accusation, the nobles are completely desperate about the situation. The knight continues and says that since they dared to undermine the authority of the crown, that was treason. From there, he asks for His Highness's word. He asks whom the prince wishes him to bring to their knees at that moment. Our protagonist just gives a wicked and very satisfied smile. He already has the perfect answer to that question. With a cold look, he glares at all the nobles present there. Without hesitation, he orders the knights to arrest them all. Soon after, our protagonist is summoned to the throne room. The king says he caused a scene as soon as his probation was over. The king shouts furiously that 14 sons of nobles were taken away. He accuses his son of using every excuse he could against them. Our protagonist just looks at him with a bored expression. The king asks if he has any idea what he has just done. The king thinks his son must be punished for invoking royal authority, but with 14 families involved, the reaction cannot be ignored. With a smile, our protagonist asks if his father is worried. He wants to know if the king is afraid of the reaction of those families. He explains that those nobles are outcasts in their own homes. They are failures who would only bring shame to their families. With a malicious smile, he suggests that the king send letters. His expression shows he has a well-thought-out plan. The king asks who the letters would be for, and the young man provokes him. He says there are people who can better handle the internal noise. With a confident smile, he reveals his genius plan. He suggests the king send the letters to the brothers of the scoundrels he arrested. Our protagonist then asks if he is wrong in his plan. The king just remains silent and seems to think about the proposal. The king then orders everyone to leave the throne room. Our protagonist thinks he left his father speechless with his plan. With a smile, our protagonist tells Adelia not to be so tense. He assures her he has no plans to hurt her. The young woman becomes desperate and asks what she did wrong. She can't understand the reason for being called there. Our protagonist remains silent and thinks the old prince must have tormented her quite a bit. He remembers that her family barely has a name in the register of nobles. They fell from grace and lost all their prestige. The glorious history of the family was erased. The brave deeds of their ancestors were completely forgotten over time. The great power and high pride of the Bayern family. It all disappeared without leaving a single trace behind. With that, he uses his ability and sees Adelia's stats. She has an aptitude for swordsmanship and mana sensitivity. Suddenly, our protagonist is completely shocked. He wonders what on earth he just saw on that screen. He can't believe the girl's traits: butcher, warmonger, weak-minded, caring, and servile nature. At the sight of blood, she goes insane and is crazy for battles. But at the same time, she is weak of heart and dependent on others. Our protagonist pulls his hair in frustration. He realizes she has unparalleled talent but no trait to control the madness. He wonders if it's really right to unleash that madness upon the world. The idea leaves him completely terrified and unsure of what to do. Faced with that situation, he just stares at the maid in silence. The decision he needs to make is not an easy one. Even so, he decides he should at least try. The opportunity to awaken such great power cannot be ignored. After all, she has S-rank talent for swordsmanship, and that's something he can't just let pass without trying. However, our protagonist realizes there is a trait he can exploit. Her servile nature makes her feel joy in serving a master with all her heart. From there, he calls her by the name of Adelia Bayern. With a serious look, he orders the girl to swear loyalty to him. Adelia is completely shocked by the unexpected request. She can't understand what His Highness means by that. He explains that it means she will become his knight. And he demands that she take the oath right there, without a second's hesitation. The young woman falls to her knees, desperate with the situation. She says that this is not something she can simply handle. He reminds her that she said her family was insignificant, and promises that he will take responsibility for her house. In return, she must swear loyalty to him without question, and she must also serve him as her master for the rest of her life. He says that if she can't control her own madness, he himself will take the reins and handle everything for her. Adelia asks if he will really take responsibility for her family. Our protagonist answers yes without hesitation. He says that if she wants, he can summon her family to the capital. With that, the young woman accepts the proposal with tears in her eyes. From there, she introduces herself as the eldest daughter of the House of Bayern, and swears her loyalty to Prince Adrian Leonberger. She says she will serve and dedicate herself to him as her master, and that she will do so for the rest of her life without question. With his hand on her head, he just says it's good enough. The oath of the new knight has finally been accepted. He warns that from now on, she must obey his commands, and that she must not question any of his orders. With her eyes shining, she seems completely hypnotized. Her servile nature has been successfully activated by the prince. Even with everything settled, our protagonist still wonders if he made the right choice after all. From there, rumors spread that the prince has returned to his old trashy habits, and that now he has even appointed a maid who has never touched a sword as his direct knight. Because of this, people conclude that he is trying to build a harem under the guise of knights. Our protagonist gets irritated and wonders since when everyone became so interested in his life. He complains that he only brought one direct knight, but everyone has had something to say about it since morning. Suddenly, the king appears, shouting that he's on the verge of a migraine trying to clean up his mess. Next, Bale questions if he has completely given up on the bet they made, and even his brother Gillian appears, mocking that appointing a maid as a knight is so like him. Our protagonist gets tired of all of it and wonders why rumors travel so fast. To make matters worse, a maid announces that the queen has arrived, and our protagonist freaks out, asking for a break. The queen says she thought he had changed, but it seems he intends to return to his old habits. But with a thoughtful look, She says that perhaps that is the best thing to do in the end. She says that when his wife is chosen, he will stop wandering around, and he is confused. The queen then shouts for him to trust her, as she will ensure she finds a suitable wife this time. After that conversation, our protagonist is left completely speechless and doesn't know what to think anymore. Meanwhile, Adelia seems confused and asks if that means she will possess mana now. With a smile, he answers yes and warns that she will possess as a very special type of mana. From there, he concentrates and begins to channel all his bluish energy towards the girl. He thinks that the world has completely forgotten the Sword Queen, but he has forgotten nothing about her. Our protagonist remembers the footsteps she left and the way the sword danced in her fingers. With that, a golden memory of the legendary warrior seems to touch Adelia to transfer her power. He even remembers the sound of that heart that beat in such a heroic and powerful way. Because of this, all the golden energy concentrates in the girl's chest like a new power core. Right after, a status window announces that mana has been detected within Adelia Bayern. The mana has been successfully imprinted on her and is completely stabilized within her body. The young woman's eyes shine with the new energy, and a mana heart has finally been successfully created. She stares at the golden energy in her chest and realizes that it's real mana for the first time. Our protagonist explains that what she experienced was the refinement method and tells her to practice. Suddenly, he feels a sharp pain in his head and Adelia despairs, asking if he's okay. He thinks it's incredible that he ended up in this state just from forging a single mana heart. With a weak voice, he says he's just a little exhausted, and Adelia asks how he could go so far for her. He tells the young woman to forget it and says she can leave now, but Adelia remains silent and stares at him. Our protagonist asks why she's looking at him like that, and the young woman is speechless. Suddenly, she bows and shouts that she will serve him with all her loyalty for the rest of her life. With a smile, he tells her to just remember that he is her master from now on. The young woman responds with a very enthusiastic yes, her eyes shining with happiness at her new position. Our protagonist thinks he's afraid he'll actually forget that he is her master in the future. Looking back, he sees the girl with a frightening look and thinks he's right about that. A few days later, Kars calls him and says he has information about the Bernardo Eli he mentioned. Kars says he heard he is being held by the Royal Guard as a witness to the recent incident. Our protagonist asks if he will have to attend the trial, and Kars says that royalty never testifies. With a sigh of relief, he realizes he won't have to worry about that problem. Even so, he thinks they're making a big fuss over a simple trial. From there, he turns to Adelia and asks how she has been feeling lately, making the young woman nervous. Questioning about the mana heart, he wants to know if the energy has fully stabilized in her yet. Ordering firmly, our protagonist warns that from today on, she will participate in his daily training. Pointing to the courtyard, he tells the girl to change her clothes and meet him on the training ground now. Looking at the old rag, he demands she drop it, as she is no longer a simple cleaning maid. Arriving at the field, our protagonist begins his stretches, preparing for the physical exercise. Stretching his arms, he hears an indignant question about what on earth he thinks he's doing. Replying sarcastically, he says he's just warming up, but his furious uncle says he's not talking about him. Pointing to Adelia running, the uncle questions the presence of that weak girl on the training field. Smirking, our protagonist confirms that the rumor is real and that he is making her a knight. Shouting furiously, Bale asks if the title of knight seems so insignificant to him. Complaining about the intrusion, our protagonist questions why his uncle has become so boring and annoying. Running non-stop, Adelia hears the heated argument between the two in the middle of the courtyard as she trains. Falling to her knees, the girl says with a weak voice that she has finally finished the 10 laps he asked for. Ignoring his uncle's complaints, our protagonist walks over to the exhausted girl on the ground to check on her. Apologizing, Adelia feels guilty, but he just hands her something to drink calmly. Teaching the basics, he warns that today she will learn the fundamental stances. Moving quickly, he demonstrates the strike so she can copy the movement. Holding the sword somewhat awkwardly, she asks if she's doing the position correctly. Breathing heavily, she struggles to maintain a firm posture as he requested. Suddenly, her gaze shines, and something awakens within her killer instinct. Cutting through the wind, the girl executes a perfect and violent strike. Observing the scene, Bale is shocked to see that she learned just by watching once. Returning to normal, she asks if she did it right, not noticing the power she unleashed. Analyzing the girl, the uncle realizes she has a natural talent for killing. Feeling a chill, our protagonist realizes he was almost decapitated. Noticing the murderous aura, he sees that her sword seeks only the enemy's blood. Imagining the scene, he feels that if he takes one wrong step, he'll end up losing his life right there. Frightened by her potential, he breaks into a cold sweat while trying to compose himself from the shock. Approaching, Gillian comments, impressed by the maid's hidden talent. Facing his brother, our protagonist asks irritably what he came there to do. Warning sharply, our protagonist tells his brother not to get any wrong ideas in his head. Smiling mockingly, Gillian asks what kind of nonsense he plans to do with the girl. Holding his sword, he says that a maid like her is nothing to a true master. Unleashing his blue aura, he claims that his brother will never be able to handle her potential. Increasing his magical pressure, he tries to intimidate our protagonist with his electric power. Staring at his brother without fear, he retorts that if he can't handle her, no one else can. With a dark look, he completes his sentence, making it clear that he is the only one qualified. Exploding in mana, a powerful blue sphere begins to form around him. Revealing his true nature, he declares that he is the only one capable of guiding that power. Remembering his past, he invokes the image of the giant king that he himself defeated. Bringing forth his memories, he recalls the bone dragon he faced in the mountains. Showing its true form, the legendary magic sword Gruhan shines with all its splendor. Looking with glowing red eyes, he is the one who drank the blood of countless demons. Emanating a murderous aura, our protagonist faces his brother with overwhelming pressure. Sensing the danger, Gillian retreats, frightened and completely shocked by what he just felt. Declaring his possession, he warns that the girl belongs only to him. Enveloped in a red aura, he makes the warning very clear. Completing the sentence with a murderous look, he says that she is his. The sinister energy around him grows stronger and stronger. Turning his back, he orders his brother never to covet her. The pressure he emanates is suffocating and extremely dangerous. Facing his brother, he affirms that everything about Adelia belongs to him. No one else has the right to touch what is his. Watching in silence, Gillian realizes he cannot win there. The warning has been given, and he retreats in the face of that absurd pressure. Glowing red, his eye reveals a hidden insanity. The bloodlust slowly begins to take over his mind. Losing consciousness, reality begins to disappear around him. There is no vitality or joy in that deep void. Plunging into the abyss, only cold and calm fill his senses. He sinks deeper and deeper into the darkness of his mind. Appearing in the darkness, the giant sword reveals itself, utterly imposing. That is the true form of his ancient and powerful soul. Surrounded by damned souls, he feels fingers pulling him down. His soul becomes a drop in the lake of eternal and cold chaos. Fighting against the abyss, he shouts that it is not yet time to go. With willpower, he tries to return to the surface now. Unleashing his power, he expels the souls that tried to take him by force. An explosion of red and blue energy happens instantly. Regaining control, the blue energy returns to flow in his tired body. He takes a deep breath, trying to stabilize himself after the outburst. Dissipating the aura, the training ground quickly returns to normal. The tension in the air finally begins to decrease in that place. Looking back, Gillian wonders if he can't even covet the past. He leaves there, confused by what he just witnessed. Shouting furiously, Bale warns that she holds the lives of thousands of soldiers in her hands. Comparing to the past, he says she is worth 1,000 men, just like the legendary eggs. Staring at his uncle with boredom, our protagonist just listens to the speech about conviction. Recalling the winter, he says there is no need to repeat the tragedy in the north. Hesitating for a moment, he admits there is a catch in that complicated situation. Trying to recruit the girl, he promises to make her a real knight if she follows him. Refusing the offer, Adelia places her hand on her chest and affirms that her loyalty already has an owner. Facing the Count firmly, she says she cannot follow his orders at all. Smiling with satisfaction, our protagonist tells her to ignore that man's delusions. Taunting his uncle, he asks if there is any objection or if he will force the girl to choose. Threatening with treason, he asks if Count Balahard wants to be punished for it again. Observing from a distance, Bale warns that if the offer was refused, there is nothing more to be done. Accepting the situation, he warns them not to meet an unjust end and leaves. Cutting through the air with violence, Adelia trains hard to polish her raw and frightening talent. Admitting his uselessness, he decides not to interfere so as not to scratch that rough diamond. Unleashing a golden aura, Adelia wields the sword with a perfect and powerful stance. Widening his eyes, Bale is astonished to recognize that familiar energy in her blade. Realizing the situation, our protagonist is amazed that she has already learned the sword's resonance. Clapping, he praises her performance while the girl catches her breath. Tired, feeling threatened, the uncle thinks that at this rate, he might end up being surpassed by her. Turning to his nephew, he asks incredulously if he taught her the mana heart. Answering without giving it much thought, our protagonist confirms and asks what the problem is. Shouting indignantly, Bale says it was bad enough for him to learn that cheap, vulgar trick. Staring at his uncle with a cold look, our protagonist loses his patience with that speech. Ordering curtly, he tells the Count to get out of there immediately before he gets any more irritated. Ignoring the order, Bale laments that he has ruined the bright future the girl could have had. Calling his knight, our protagonist tells Cars to drag the man out of the courtyard. Snorting with anger, Bale says he doesn't need that and will leave on his own. Observing the scene, Adelia watches the powerful Count walk away with a look of disappointment. Questioning with fear, she asks if the technique she learned is really that bad. Denying firmly, he assures the girl that the technique is not bad. Confused by the situation, Adelia asks why the Count spoke that way. Looking away, he says he doesn't know and complains about the people of this era. Looking at the horizon, he laments that they have forgotten the real value of the mana heart. Muttering under his breath, he thinks that if they knew the truth, they wouldn't despise the power so much. Promising to show the truth, he guarantees that she will soon understand its strength. Exploding in blue energy, the wooden sword hits the ground with violence. Facing his uncle, he realizes he still can't manifest the aura on the blade. Feeling the weight, he admits it's difficult just to hold the wooden weapon. Issuing a challenge, Bale says he just has to make him take one step back to win. Crossing his arms, the uncle promises that if that happens, he will acknowledge him. Gripping the sword tightly, our protagonist asks what the bet was again. Smirking, he confirms if the prize was the granting of a wish. Offering his greatest treasure, Bale promises to teach him his secret technique if he loses. Refusing the offer, he charges quickly, aiming a direct strike at his uncle's neck. Attacking with everything he has, he brings the blade down, aiming for his uncle's shoulder. The strike carries all his determination to win the bet. Cutting through the wind, the wooden sword follows its relentless and swift path. But Bale doesn't even move in the face of that obvious attack. Focusing on the impact, our protagonist puts all his weight into the final movement. He hopes to at least make his uncle take a step back. Colliding violently, the wood cracks upon meeting the uncle's perfect defense. The dry sound of the impact echoes throughout the courtyard. Flying away, the sword is thrown into the air by the force of the block. Bale's defense was like hitting an iron wall. Trembling from the shock, he stares at his uncle in total disbelief at his strength. The power difference between the two is a giant abyss. Taunting coldly, Bale asks if that's all he has to offer. The Count's look is one of pure disappointment with his nephew. Glaring angrily, our protagonist tastes the bitter taste of his current weakness. He hates being treated like a useless child. Taking a few steps back, he tries to regain the balance he lost in the failed attack. Defeat seems inevitable in this tense situation. Maintaining his posture, Bale questions if he's ready to give up the fight. The uncle seems bored with this game. Denying with a smile, he says of course he's not going to stop now. Stubbornness shines in his eyes as he gets up from the ground. Admiring the power, he recognizes that his uncle is a monster of brute force. The electric aura around Bale is truly frightening. Unleashing his mana, a blue flame suddenly envelops his body for the fight. At his current level, he needs to use everything he has. Smiling mysteriously, he asks if his uncle doesn't find something strange about this. His posture changes completely at this decisive moment. Hesitating, confused, Bale asks about the sword from 400 years ago. He finally notices something familiar in the technique being used. Recalling the past, he says that Mana Heart Knights once achieved impossible feats in ancient times. Cutting through the skies, a legendary knight raised his blade to protect justice in dark times. Summoning thunder, the righteous knight would say that a single sword was enough to eliminate any evil in the world. Falling into oblivion, everyone ignores that the Mana Heart was considered a humiliation times later. Returning to the present, Bale asks where he's going with this, and he replies that he disagrees with that foolish view. Holding his weapon, he asserts that everyone knows the technique, but has forgotten who its true master was. Getting his attention, he asks if his uncle has ever heard of the ancient poem of martial merit. Mocking the question, Bale says a dueling ground is no place for reciting poems. Smiling with interest, the uncle admits he's curious to hear what his nephew has to say. Criticizing the ignorance, our protagonist warns that forgetting a technique doesn't make it useless in any way. Refusing to rest, he declines the break suggested by his uncle and prepares to attack again with everything he has. Stomping firmly, he says that the path a knight walks becomes their own achievements. Emanating power, he declares that hundreds of victories are the absolute proof of his strength and honor. Surprising his uncle, his aura changes drastically, and Bale is left confused by the sudden pressure. Clashing blades, he shouts that these glorious feats become the true poem of martial merit. Explaining the technique, he reveals that this energy is the materialization of the knight's will. Enveloped by the aura, He says the oath becomes the warrior's own flesh and blood. Smiling confidently, he affirms that this perfect fusion is the secret forgotten in time. Holding the sword with both hands, he finally unleashes the true poem of martial merit. Watching, perplexed, Bale can't believe the amount of energy his nephew is releasing. Muttering under his breath, he admits he's heard legends about that power, but never believed them. Charging forward quickly, our protagonist closes the distance between them in the blink of an eye. Parrying the blow, the uncle feels the absurd weight of an attack that should be from a beginner. Exploding on impact, the blue mana tries to break through Count Balahard's impenetrable defense. Feeling his arm tremble, Bale realizes he completely underestimated the strength of that ancient technique. Maintaining focus, the uncle has to use his own mana to avoid being pushed back now. Continuing the offensive, our protagonist spins his body to deliver another powerful attack. With his eyes glowing, he puts all his concentration into that decisive move of the fight. Exchanging blows, the speed of the battle increases, and the courtyard is lit by blue sparks. Finishing the sequence, he brings the sword down with all his might, releasing a vertical pillar of light. Emanating power, he shows the true strength a mana heart can achieve in battle. Glowing brightly, the wooden blade seems to have turned into a legendary weapon at that moment. Facing his uncle, he warns that the duel is not over yet and prepares to attack. Clashing weapons, the two exchange violent blows, sending sparks flying everywhere. Cutting through the wind, he delivers a rapid sequence that pressures the Count's defense. Smiling confidently, he puts all his strength into the attack to try and break the enemy's guard. Resisting the impact, Bale feels his bones vibrate with the absurd power of that blow. With the wood cracking, the swords continue to clash in a contest of brute force. Pushing with all his might, he manages to unbalance his uncle for a brief moment in the charge. Sliding back, Bale is forced to take a step back to avoid falling before the attack. Taking a deep breath, our protagonist regains his posture, ready to continue the offensive. Observing the scene, Bale realizes he underestimated the boy and needs to take this seriously. Unleashing his aura, the uncle warns that he's getting too arrogant for his own good. Planting his foot, he stops his retreat and tears up the ground with the force of his solid stance. Exploding in light, the two energies clash, creating a shockwave across the courtyard. Exploding with the impact, the dust settles, revealing the end of the intense combat. Raising his hand, Bale declares that's enough and ends the duel right there. Admitting defeat, he says he finally acknowledges his nephew's skill. Kneeling on the ground, our protagonist breathes heavily as his uncle approaches him. Stopping in front of him, Bale observes the deplorable state of the broken wooden sword. Holding the broken hilt, our protagonist asks what that sudden declaration was. Recalling history, Bale thinks of the time when humans were hunted like animals. Appearing from nowhere, a hero wielded the sword and drove the beasts away forever. Fighting against the darkness, he paved the way for humanity to survive. Facing hell, he defeated the Demon King and his armies of terrible monsters. Facing his end, he slayed colossal beasts that terrorized the entire world. Leading armies, he marked the beginning of an era filled with living legends. Superimposing the images, Bale sees the shadow of those heroes reflected in the young prince now. Breaking the silence, our protagonist asks why his uncle has such a foolish look on his face. Mocking him mercilessly, he questions if the shock of defeat has made the old man senile. Stomping firmly, he shows that his aura may seem crude and very rude on the outside. Questioning his uncle, he asks if that wild power is really a mistake. Plunging into darkness, he questions if that path is really so narrow. Gripping the hilt, he scoffs at the limited view his uncle has of power. Slicing through the scales, he invokes the ancient will to pierce the dragon's skin. Facing the beast, he becomes the very hunter who slays the red dragon. Drinking the blood, he feels the warmth of the creature's life flowing through his hands. Pulsing in his veins, the warm blood of the sword awakens with uncontrollable fury. Awakening the power, he finally brings forth the true nature of that blade. Burying the fear, he becomes one with the murderous essence buried deep inside. Tearing through everything, he charges forward with a manic look focused only on destroying the target. Blocking the blow, Bale feels the absurd weight of that hate-fueled attack. Exploding in light, the wooden sword can't withstand the pressure and begins to crack. His eyes widening, the uncle sees the madness in his nephew's eyes at that instant. Blinding everything, an intense glow consumes the courtyard, ending the clash of powers. Kicking up dust, the explosion covers the entire courtyard with a dense, suffocating cloud. Coughing hard, our protagonist emerges from the middle of the smoke, completely exhausted. Kneeling on the ground, he can barely keep his body upright after expending all his mana. Panting, he lifts his head and asks hopefully if he finally managed to win. Facing the boy, Bale remains motionless with an unreadable expression on his face. Looking down at his feet, the uncle checks his position on the ground, destroyed by the impact. Awaiting the answer, our protagonist waits for the final verdict on the bet. Declaring coldly, Bale announces that unfortunately, he lost the challenge this time. Hearing the sentence, a red, murderous aura appears out of nowhere to torment him. Roaring fiercely, the dragon's soul awakens in his mind, trying to consume everything. Gripping the hilt, he feels the bloodlust taking over his consciousness. Screaming in pain, he begs for that cursed voice to stop tormenting his head. Succumbing to the darkness, his vision fades, and he loses consciousness in the courtyard. Waking with a start, he sits up in bed, drenched in a cold sweat with his heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, our protagonist realizes he passed out and is in his room. Reflecting in bed, he realizes he is still too weak. His mind drifts back to his glory days as a sword. Remembering the past, he recalls how easy it was to slice through a dragon. The strength of his past life still echoes in his memory. Gripping the sheet, he feels the frustration of having lost the bet. This human body is a limiting prison for him. Raising his hand, a blue aura glows and responds to his call. At least his mana has increased thanks to the effort of the fight. Expanding the power, the energy flows smoothly and fills the room. He feels he is one step closer to his true self. Praising himself, he boasts about having invoked the ancient will. Even with a weak body, he accomplished quite a feat. Repeating the mantra, he says he perished 1,000 times and was reborn 100. This is the immortal essence of his warrior soul. Smiling with satisfaction, he realizes it was worth risking everything. The calculated risk brought valuable rewards in the end. Approaching, Bale observes him with a serious and thoughtful expression. The uncle seems to be assessing his nephew's true potential. Entering the room, the maid brings urgent news for His Highness. She seems nervous with Count Balahard's presence there. Announcing the visit, the king and queen suddenly enter the room. They came to check on their son's condition after he fainted. Sitting on the bed, our protagonist greets his parents with respect. He tries to hide the fatigue he still feels in his body. Remembering his uncle, he asks where Count Balahard is gone now. The man mysteriously disappeared after the king and queen arrived. Lying down again, he decides to rest and ignores everyone's presence. His body demands absolute rest after that battle. Looking at his hand, he sees a scar left by the impact of the fight. It's a shameful mark of his defeat to his uncle. Worrying about his spirit, he knows he will pay a terrible price if he doesn't rest now. Confusing reality and the past, his mind could become a chaos of broken memories. Fearing he'll go mad, he's afraid of getting stuck reliving old battles in an endless cycle. Grumbling in bed, he complains that he got stuck in the sword's memories again. Remembering Awakens, he thinks that just imagining that woman gives him the chills. Praising the warrior, he admits that she was a great swordswoman known to all. Talking to Adelia, he reveals that she is a direct descendant of that living legend. Doubting the story, Adelia is shocked to learn that her ancestor was so powerful. Explaining the potential, he says she needs to grow a lot to reach that level. Questioning the future, he asks what she wants to do after learning the sword. Stuttering nervously, the girl doesn't know what to answer to that difficult question. Imagining the title, she can hardly believe she can really become a knight. Blushing, she tries to form an answer, but the words escape her mouth. Breaking the silence, he tells her to think about it later if she doesn't know now. Standing up decisively, she declares she will be His Highness's loyal sword forever. Realizing the truth, he understands the meaning of the true Gesta Sanctorum. With trumpets sounding, the story begins with the loud noise of a military charge. Ending the fight, everything concludes with a solemn hymn of victory in the war. Reflecting deeply, he thinks about how his own legend will be written there. Swearing loyalty, Adelia promises to dedicate her entire life to her master now. Breaking barriers, some stories resonate through future generations. Transcending everything, the power of narrative crosses even dimensions and time. Shining brightly, the golden light envelopes the room with a divine and pure energy. Hearing prayers, he feels the wishes of those who face their end with no escape. Becoming a miracle, faith transforms into real power, descending upon the earth. Accepting the vow, he receives the sincere devotion of the kneeling girl. Blinking in confusion, Adelia doesn't understand what just happened to her. Appearing on the screen, a window announces that the oath has been confirmed by the system. Sharing power, the details of her story now flow directly to him. Thanking her happily, he smiles at his new faithful and very dedicated knight. Surprised by the gesture, Adelia is left speechless before her master's gratitude. Reflecting deeply, he knows that one day, that girl will create her own sacred legend. 2 days later, the sun illuminates the royal castle, marking the beginning of a new journey. Traveling in silence, our protagonist observes the landscape while Kars tensely accompanies him. Remaining silent, the knight avoids looking the prince in the eyes, feeling the heavy atmosphere. Interrupting their path, the fourth queen, Elizabeth, appears, asking if he is looking for the king. Facing the woman, he greets her coldly, remembering that she is just one of the queens. Speaking haughtily, she says she forgave the maid only out of respect for his royal blood. Questioning the forgiveness, he calmly asks if she really thinks she forgave anything. Warning about his uncle, she advises that Count Balhard will not tarnish his name for him. Thinking to himself, he decides he doesn't need any human shield to protect himself. Shocked by the response, she covers her mouth and calls him arrogant and shameless. Replying with boredom, he just denies caring about any protection they offer. Recalling the fight, he knows he hurt his uncle's pride by denying his truths that day. Understanding the pain, he realizes the demon of the heart planted in the Count must be growing. Praising the uncle, she says he dedicated 40 years of his life protecting the people. His reputation is completely impeccable. Remembering the loyalty, she affirms that Bale never sought personal power against the king. His devotion to the crown is unquestionable. Hearing the warning, our protagonist faces the woman with a serious and closed expression. She asks him not to trust the sword too much, revealing a secret. She says that his uncle volunteered to watch over him during his confinement. No one wanted that difficult position. Becoming thoughtful, he tries to understand what motivated that strange attitude from his uncle. The revelation leaves a doubt in his mind. Questioning everything, he wonders why that man would do something like that for him. The reason behind it is still a mystery. Appearing suddenly, the old scholar Bernal shows up to begin the studies. His stern look promises to be quite tiring. Refusing on the spot, our protagonist warns that he refuses to study anything. He has no time to waste with books now. Ignoring the refusal, the professor remains calm beside the knight in the hall. The prince's stubbornness doesn't affect him in the slightest. Complaining loudly, he questions why he needs to study if he's already royalty. The old man replies that without study, he is like an animal. Shouting, offended, he asks if he's being called an animal to his face. The professor retorts that he growled like a beast. Snorting with anger, he says he hasn't even started using his real vocabulary. The argument between the two heats up quickly. Assuring he knows everything, he claims he already possesses all the necessary knowledge. Therefore, he sees no reason to continue the lessons. Accepting his words, the old man proposes a simple agreement to resolve the impasse. If it's true, he will never return there again. Proposing a debate, the professor chooses the theory of mana as the topic for the test. Smiling confidently, our protagonist accepts immediately. Explaining calmly, he says a person must always watch their back. If you lower your guard, someone will try to climb over you. Handing him a book, the professor says he will find it interesting. The old man starts talking about politics and loyalty. Analyzing the text, he reads that the relationship between ruler and vassal is a contract. It is a fair and cold exchange of mutual interests. Debating the idea, he questions what relationship should exist between king and people. The dialogue deepens more than he expected. Arguing quickly, he says the king protects the people, and the people pay taxes. Loyalty is just the price of stability. As the hours pass, the sun sets while the two continue talking nonstop. The discussion flows naturally until nightfall. Ending the lesson, the professor says to continue the next day. He seems satisfied with the progress made that day. Laughing loudly, our protagonist is amused by the crazy old man. He never imagined the lesson would be so interesting in the end. Getting confused, he realizes that was just a common lesson, but for some reason, he enjoyed the conversation they had. Sighing tiredly, he thinks that old man is really very cunning. The professor managed to keep him in class without effort. Walking alone, Bernal thinks that the first prince is different from the rumors. He sees a hidden potential that no one else has noticed. Crossing the corridor, the old man smiles, satisfied with his discovery that day. That problematic student could be a rare gem. Lying in bed, our protagonist stares at the ceiling with a bored look. The silence of the room makes him restless and pensive. Complaining of boredom, he mutters that there's nothing to do there. Life in the palace is starting to get too monotonous. Entering the room, Adelia hears the complaint and asks what's wrong. She seems worried about her master's state. Stretching his body, he complains that winter is taking too long to arrive. Announcing the visit, the maid says that Sir Gallinard is waiting at the door. Telling him to enter, he wonders what to do to pass the time in this boredom. Commenting on the time, Gallinard says it's been a long while since their last training session. Facing the visitor, he notices that the knight seems worried about something. Entering slowly, the man has a heavy expression, as if carrying the world on his shoulders. Observing the guest, our protagonist sees that the demon's shadow still haunts him. Asking forgiveness, Gallinard apologizes with his head bowed and a trembling voice. Surprised by this, our protagonist didn't expect that apology. Explaining the reason, he says he broke a promise he made to himself. Confessing his guilt, he admits he avoided the student because of his own demons. Recalling the warning, Elizabeth told him not to trust those knights so blindly. Asking for his wish, our protagonist wants to know what the knight expects of him now. Promising loyalty, Gallinard says that if he is his true student, he will follow him. Considering the proposal, he thinks about whether he should accept the request of this tormented man. Expressing his wish, he decides to say what he wants before anything else. Calling his uncle Bale, he proposes that the two of them go out somewhere together. Remembering the end, he says that since the confinement is over, they can leave at any time. Specifying the location, he asks to go far from the capital on a longer trip. Looking carefully, Bale remains silent, trying to understand the reason for that strange request. Explaining the delay, he warns that organizing the schedule and the escort will take time. Accepting the condition, our protagonist agrees and asks to be notified when everything is ready. Entering the room, Kars appears and interrupts the conversation with a curious air. Staring doubtfully, Kars asks why he is looking at him that way. Admitting surprise, Kars confesses that he expected a much more absurd and irrational request. Reflecting on the promise, our protagonist knows that the Count really failed him before. Feeling sorry, he sees that the stubborn old man is suffering and decides to forgive him for now. Laughing at the situation, he asks why Kars is laughing at someone else's misfortune now. Getting his attention, Adelia runs in with an important letter in her hands to deliver. Handing over the message, she announces that the letter he had been waiting for has finally arrived today. Breaking the red seal, he finally discovers the answer he had been waiting for in the letter. Revealing the name, the text confirms that the invisible sword has accepted his invitation. Imagining the warrior, he knows that the blue moon will be very useful in his plans. Smiling with satisfaction, he puts the paper away, feeling that everything is going very well. Traveling days later, the royal procession leaves the capital heading for its new destination. Asking impatiently, he sticks his head out, wanting to know if there's much longer to go. Replying calmly, Bale informs him that they are already arriving at the desired location. Observing the landscape, he sees the buildings of the famous village approaching just ahead. Displaying the crest, the Allen colony prides itself on forging the best weapons in the kingdom. Hammering the steel, the blacksmiths work hard creating powerful war equipment. Explaining the objective, he tells his uncle that he is looking for a very specific blacksmith there. Remembering the past, he mentions a craftsman who once worked for the crown. Recalling the figure, he thinks of the eccentric man with a strange personality. Shuddering, he feels a chill down his spine, just from remembering that fellow. Demanding the best, he warns that he needs a weapon that can withstand his full power. Warning about the blacksmith, Bale alerts that the man is exceptionally delicate to deal with. Shaking his head, our protagonist doesn't believe he will have any problems with that. Showing the map, the narrator says that the 30-day journey has just begun. As the journey progresses, 5 days pass with the procession following the road. Snorting with boredom, he complains that being stuck in the carriage is a slow torture. Looking at Adelia, he sees the girl quietly in the corner, looking like a doll. Staring at the landscape, he reflects that almost a month has passed since his return. Seeking focus, he decides to use the free time to meditate and cultivate his energy. Feeling the mana, blue particles begin to dance around his seated body. Absorbing everything, he pulls the energy of the royal moon into his heart. Spinning quickly, the flow of mana becomes a powerful whirlpool in his chest. Opening his eyes, he sees the physical manifestation of his power floating there. Astonished by the shape, he questions if that is really what it appears to be. Staring at the circle, he can hardly believe the absurd speed of his progress. Asking in shock, he doesn't understand how he reached the fourth circle so quickly. Realizing the origin, he identifies the mana of the Dragon Slayer sword reacting. Flowing violently, the ancient energy forces the expansion of his current limits. Resisting the pain, he feels his veins burn as the power settles in. Breaking the chains, the seal that restricted his growth is shattered. Breaking through the block, he finally achieves the freedom to evolve without barriers. His eyes widening, he is shocked by the ease of that sudden advancement. Calling for her master, Adelia asks with concern if he is feeling well there. Quickly covering it up, he stretches and says he was just stretching his muscles. Smiling with satisfaction, he clenches his fist, feeling the new strength pulsing through his body. Arriving at the destination, the carriage stops in front of the imposing Allen residence. Getting out of the vehicle, he says it is an honor to visit the famous forging site. Bowing respectfully, Torden of the Allen Forges welcomes the prince. Inviting him inside, the host guides the group into the large mansion. Observing the walls, our protagonist sees various weapons displayed like trophies. Analyzing the pieces, he thinks with disdain that all of it is just useless decoration. Walking through the corridors, he praises the warm reception of the Allen family. Asking about the request, Torden confirms that the sword is already ready and waiting. Ignoring the answer, he asks to take a walk and get to know the place first. Accepting the request, Torden guides him to visit the famous forge of the Allen family. Descending the stairs, the heat increases, and the sound of hammering gets louder and louder. Explaining with pride, Torden says the forge never stops working, not for a second. Complaining about the climate, our protagonist says the place is as hot as an oven. Commenting on the work, the host says the blacksmiths are dedicated to the art. Catching his attention, an explosion of flames erupts from one of the forges in the back. Shouting orders, a man commands his assistants amidst the intense fire. Observing the scene, our protagonist feels something different coming from that direction. Cowling for the prince, Torden tries to divert his attention from that chaos. Ignoring the warning, he continues walking towards the heat and the noisy man. Hammering furiously, the elderly blacksmith strikes the incandescent metal nonstop. Recognizing the aura, he realizes he has found exactly who he was looking for there. Hearing the metallic sound, he recognizes each beat of the hammer on the hot steel. Approaching slowly, he feels drawn to the perfect harmony of those hammer blows. Focusing on the work, the blacksmith ignores everything around him, concentrated only on the blade. Opening his eyes, he has a fleeting glimpse of his first memory as a sword. Remembering his creation, he recalls the exact moment he was forged in the fire. Wiping away sweat, Adelia cleans the prince's face, who is sweating from the heat. Waking from the trance, he looks at the girl, surprised by her sudden gesture. Thanking her quietly, he turns his attention back to the man who works nonstop. Explaining the situation, Torden says that he is a very skilled blacksmith from there. Observing from a distance, he realizes that the old man puts his soul into every strike he makes. Interrupting the work, an angry man shouts for the blacksmith to stop immediately. Introducing the boss, Torden says that he is the one in charge of that section of the forge. Ignoring the order, the old man continues hammering the metal as if he hears nothing. Charging furiously, the boss tries to stop the work and curses the stubborn blacksmith. Grabbing his arm, our protagonist stops the man from touching the old craftsman. Staring with authority, he orders silence and tells everyone to move away immediately. Analyzing the blade, he sees that the metal shines with an almost hypnotic intensity. Noticing the effort, he sees that the blacksmith is working beyond his physical limit. Warning of the danger, he shouts that the iron is cooling and tells them to stoke the fire. Being in a panic, the assistants rush to grab their tools and liven up the flames. Crossing his arms, he decides to watch and see how far this man will go with his determination. Watching in silence, he sees sweat and blood mix in the blazing forge. Hammering with rhythm, the old man seems to enter a trance, like state with the metal. Echoing in the place, the sound of the steel being molded fills the entire environment with force. Admiring the technique, he realizes that this blacksmith has something special in his hands. His eyes widening, he feels a strange resonance coming from that unfinished blade. Enveloped by the heat, he sees the blacksmith's aura merging with the fire of the forge. Continuing the work, the old man doesn't even stop to breathe, focused on his creation. Immersed in the vision, our protagonist feels a deep and inexplicable connection to it. Questioning the sensation, he wonders what on earth that vibrant energy is there. Walking in the garden, Torden explains that the old man has been acting strangely lately. Recounting the details, he says that the master has been melting down all the swords he creates. Questioning the reason, he asks if the weapons were flawed or bad in some way. Vehemently denying, Torden guarantees that every work by that man is a perfect masterpiece. Lamenting the waste, he says that no one understands why he destroys his own work. Worried about his health, Torden says that the old man has barely eaten or slept for almost a month. Listening attentively, our protagonist becomes even more intrigued by that crazy blacksmith. As the days pass, he starts visiting the forge daily to observe the master. Watching in silence, he sees the man repeat the same exhausting ritual every day. Admiring the dedication, he recognizes that he is in the presence of a truly obsessed craftsman. As night falls, the forge remains lit by the tireless fire and the hammering. As the departure approaches, the day to leave the colony finally arrives for the procession. Visiting one last time, he goes to the forge to say goodbye to the stubborn old man. Observing the work, he regrets not having seen the finished piece before leaving. Sighing in frustration, he knows he can't delay his return journey any longer now. Feeling a deep regret, he decides to leave before it gets any later. Turning his back, he announces that he needs to rest for the next morning's journey. Lamenting the missed chance, Torden really wanted him to see the finished work. Shouting suddenly, a servant runs, calling for the prince with urgency in his voice. Announcing the miracle, he says that the master blacksmith has finally finished the sword. Turning around in shock, our protagonist's eyes widen at the unexpected news. Emerging into the light, the old blacksmith walks towards him, holding something bright. Shining brightly, the blade reflects the sun's rays, dazzling everyone's vision. Cleaning the metal, the craftsman treats the weapon with a seemingly paternal care. Kneeling respectfully, he extends the sword towards the young prince. Offering his work, he dedicates his supreme creation solely to his highness. Taking the weapon, our protagonist feels the perfect balance of the metal in his hands. Admiring the edge, he notices that the blade seems to have a life of its own and pulses with power. In shock, Torden and the others can't believe the old man gave up the sword. Recognizing its value, he knows he holds a weapon worthy of a king. Awaiting the test, he holds the hilt, feeling the energy flow from the metal to his arm. Wielding the blade, he feels it is a natural extension of his own will. Raising it to the sky, the sword shines intensely, reflecting the power of its new master. Naming the weapon, he suggests the name, Dawn, because it shines like the rising sun. Asking the reason, he questions if it is the dawn of the sun or of dusk. Explaining the meaning, he says that for him, it is the dawn, but for his enemies, it will be the end. Smiling with satisfaction, he praises the work and says the old man has a gift for names. Laughing happily, the blacksmith feels honored by the compliment from someone so powerful. Suddenly fainting, the old man's body gives in to the accumulated fatigue of all those days. Catching the man, our protagonist prevents him from falling onto the hard courtyard ground. Carrying the craftsman, he informs his uncle that they will need to postpone their departure again. Deciding to stay, he announces that he will spend the night there to care for the old blacksmith. Guarding the door, the knights watch the entrance as night falls over the village. Watching him sleep, he sees the old man finally resting after completing his great mission. Reflecting on fate, he thinks that the sword chose to be born at that exact moment. Leaning in close, he whispers a secret into the sleeping blacksmith's ear. His eyes widening, the old man wakes up with a start, shocked by what he just heard. Realizing the truth, he asks tremblingly if the prince is who he thinks he is. Confirming calmly, he says that's how he felt when he was a sword. Laughing with relief, the blacksmith finally understands why he felt such a strong connection. Sighing happily, he says that now everything finally makes sense in his head. Asking for the sword, he extends a trembling hand, wanting to touch his work one more time. Handing over the hilt, our protagonist places the weapon in the creator's calloused hands. Holding it firmly, the old man caresses the cold metal with a look full of pride. Making a request, he pleads for that sword to become as great as its owner. Promising honor, he hopes the blade will accompany the prince's greatness forever. Accepting the vow, our protagonist guarantees that he will make that weapon a living legend. Returning the sword, the old man closes his eyes with a smile of pure satisfaction. Passing on peacefully, the blacksmith's hand relaxes, and he takes his last breath in the room. Observing the body, he remains silent, paying his last respects to the master. Closing his eyes, the old man finally rests in peace after delivering his masterpiece. Illuminating the tent, the torches crackle as the end quietly visits the place. Sheathing it, the sword Dawn receives its first home of red velvet. Thanking for the offer, Torden says it is an honor to present the royal family with such a gift. Handing over the sword, he says he hopes the weapon will protect the prince's life. Praising the quality, our protagonist feels the balance of the blade as he holds it. Commenting on its value, he says a sword made by that master is priceless. Smiling awkwardly, Torden tries to hide his nervousness in the face of the royal praise. Praising their loyalty, he says the Allen family has always served the crown well. Trembling with fear, Torden realizes the prince knows more than he lets on. Continuing their journey, the royal procession resumes its hurried path along the road. Looking around, he notices the infantry moving quickly to make up for lost time. Finding his uncle, he sees that Bale seems busy organizing the soldiers' march. Commenting on the haste, he asks if the king gave a tight deadline for their return. Confirming seriously, Bale says they need to reach the Stone Lion Castle today. Confessing the problem, he warns that he doesn't know how to ride a horse at all. Looking incredulously, Bale is speechless at his nephew's absurd revelation. Trying to ride, he mounts the animal with difficulty and almost falls several times. Laughing at the scene, Adelia tries to help her master, who looks like a clumsy child. Holding the reins, he struggles to maintain control of the stubborn horse on the road. Traveling with difficulty, the procession finally spots the silhouette of the lion's fortress. Arriving at the gates, the imposing structure rises majestically against the blue sky. Dismounting, he steps onto firm ground, relieved not to have fallen along the way. Receiving the visit, York of the Willowden family leads the greeting to the crown prince. Bowing respectfully, the soldiers salute the arrival of the royalty there. Observing the group, he realizes that the family of the Iron Lion is truly formidable. Recognizing the crest, he knows that these warriors protect the northern border. Remembering their history, he recalls the origin of that lineage of powerful knights. Visualizing the past, he sees the image of Arwen, the founder of that noble house. Muttering her name, he feels a pang of nostalgia remembering his old companion. Kneeling, Arwen says she counted the days waiting to see His Highness again. Feeling the hostility, Adelia instantly unleashes her murderous aura to protect her master. Glaring at the woman with hatred, the girl perceives the veiled threat in her words. Touching her shoulder, our protagonist calms his knight before she attacks right there. Calling her name, he asks Adelia to control herself and sheathe her killing intent. Obeying the order, she retracts her aura but keeps her gaze fixed on the dangerous rival. Sighing with relief, he thinks it was a good thing he already trained her mana heart. Calling for Arwen, he asks the fortress leader to accompany him inside now. Smiling at the others, he suggests that the other knights come along as well. Taunting the group, he asks if they don't have a lot of unfinished business from before. Issuing a challenge, he says it would be even better if those idiots came too. Holding the wooden sword, he announces that he wants to see the famous sword of the Iron Lion. Facing the soldiers, he asks who will be the first man to have the courage to face him. Hesitating with fear, the knights exchange nervous glances at the sudden proposal. Laughing at their cowardice, he swears in the name of the royal family that there will be no punishment for the outcome. Stepping out of formation, Francis introduces himself as a knight of the 4th Troop of the Iron Lion. Challenging the prince, he says that if His Highness permits, he would like to test his own sword. Wielding his weapon, he asks for the honor of crossing blades with the member of the royal family. Accepting the challenge, our protagonist says there is no need to ask for permission there. Taunting the soldier, he warns that he himself is the one who needs help against the knight. Charging quickly, Francis attacks with force, asking the prince to be careful now. Dodging the blow, he just observes the opponent's slow and predictable movement. Countering firmly, he hits the soldier's stomach with a mana-charged punch. Groaning in pain, Francis feels the air leave his lungs from the violent impact. Falling to the ground, the knight rolls on the dirt, defeated with just a single simple blow. Calling for the next one, he asks with boredom who will be the next victim to try their luck. Emerging from the line, Paul of the 5th Troop introduces himself, ready to avenge his fallen comrade. Attacking with all his might, he tries to surprise the prince with a quick and direct charge. Blocking easily, he deflects the blow and hits the soldier's face with the wooden sword. Flying far, Paul is thrown like a rag doll by the absurd force of the impact. Finishing them all off, he takes down another soldier with a precise and brutal blow. With bodies scattered, the fortress courtyard becomes a field of defeated knights. Observing the massacre, he sighs, disappointed with the weakness of the soldiers there. Criticizing the troop, he says he heard the Iron Lion was strong. Muttering under their breath, the soldiers complain that they are just too slow to react. Calling for Arwen, he addresses the leader, who watches everything in absolute silence. Making a proposal, he says that when he returns to the capital, she will go with him. Hesitating in her response, Arwen remains silent, not knowing how to react to that direct order. Interrupting the conversation, the commander of the Iron Lion appears to defend his subordinate. Denying the request, he says he cannot allow them to take his best warrior like this. Taunting the leader, our protagonist says that then it will be easy to resolve everything. Challenging the commander, he proposes a simple bet to decide Arwen's fate. Refusing the bet, the man says Arwen is not some cheap tournament prize. Insisting on the fight, he asks if the commander is afraid of losing to him. Accepting the duel, the man draws his sword and warns that if he wins, the prince gives up. Offering his sword, our protagonist says that if he loses, he will hand over Dawn to him. Their eyes widening, everyone is stunned by the absurd value of the bet offered there. Intervening quickly, Arwen asks him not to bet something so precious for her. Explaining the value, a soldier says that a sword like that is worth more than a castle. Accepting the challenge, Commander Elias of the Neverland family draws his own blade. Introducing himself formally, he says he accepts to fight in the name of his troop's honor. Wielding the weapon, he shows the Black Fang sword, passed down from generation to generation. Mocking his confidence, our protagonist laughs at the man's audacity to challenge him like this. Drawing his sword, he finally reveals Dawn, for all to see its real brilliance. Commenting on the irony, he says it's funny to face a master's sword with another. Revealing its origin, he says that this was the 100th piece created by the same craftsman. Growing tense, Elias realizes he is facing a weapon superior to his own heirloom. Unleashing his mana, our protagonist envelopes his body with a blue electric aura. Warning his opponent, he says to prepare, as he won't go easy in this fight. Smiling confidently, he says that a wrong path is still a path in the end. Invoking power, he criticizes the superficiality of those people's wrong paths. Explaining the technique, he says that place was never something he could call home. Observing the fight, Adelia feels the deep respect directed towards her at that moment. Declaring the truth, he says that if the path belongs to his people, that is enough. Calling his student, he asks Adelia to watch very carefully what is about to happen. Manifesting the aura, a line of blue fire appears, roaring furiously behind him. Explaining the future, he says that this is the path she will have to walk now. Understanding the lesson, Adelia sees the image of Agnes reflected in his blue flames. Agreeing with him, she promises to follow that trail of light no matter the cost. Accepting her fate, the girl feels her own golden aura resonate with her master's. Remembering the capital, Bale explains to the king that the prince's holiday ended early. Sipping tea, the king listens to the report about their arrival at the Iron Lion Castle. Commenting on the fact, Bale says it was an interesting and unexpected moment for everyone. Reporting the tension, he says that the other princes are also making their moves now. Concluding the report, he warns that the balance of power is beginning to shift. Recalling the past, Bale talks about a royal banquet that took place 6 years ago. Questioning his attitude, the man asks why he acts as the boy's guardian. Explaining the reason, he says he fulfilled the unique request of an old friend. Recalling the scene, he describes the second prince, drunk and thrown on the throne. Mocking his brother, the fat one ridiculed the first prince in front of everyone. Losing control, he asked if his brother had completely lost his mind. Charging armed, the drunk prince attacked his own blood with a sword in hand. Describing the aggressor, Bale calls him a hopeless and pathetic ruffian. Showing the rot, he says that letters and intrigues were the main course there. Revealing the danger, he says that poisons were served as if they were wine. Intervening quickly, Bale burned the cheap poison using his own blue mana. Destroying the bonds, he says he burned what little family affection still remained. Changing his opinion, he admits that spoiled prince is different now. Observing his evolution, he sees the boy transforming with each passing day. Concluding the conversation, he realizes that idiotic prince was never crazy. Holding the cup, Bale says the child he is now doesn't resemble the others. Asking for a chance, he begs the king to give his problematic nephew an opportunity. Comparing the versions, the king doesn't know if it was Bale or the prince who really changed. Interrupting the calm, a soldier runs in shouting for Lord Willowden. Announcing chaos, the messenger brings urgent news about the first prince. Returning to the courtyard, the scene shows the fortress bustling with the ongoing duel. Showing surprise, York comments that it seems something unexpected is happening outside. Correcting the focus, Bale warns that the concern should not be with the prince. Pointing out the danger, he says that those at risk are the knights facing him. Doubting his strength, York questions if the boy really has that much skill. Watching the fight, they see the bodies of soldiers flying through the air violently. Shocking everyone, the prince takes down another opponent as if it were a toy. Screaming in pain, Duncan rolls on the ground after receiving a direct and brutal blow. Watching perplexed, the soldiers comment that His Highness has won yet again. Confirming the prediction, Bale asks if he didn't warn that this would happen. Wiping away sweat, our protagonist smiles and says the ice is starting to break. Calling for the next one, he challenges more soldiers to try their luck against his blade. Remembering the advice, he thinks of his uncle saying that a royal knight is born at the second ring. Probing the thesis, he shows that those words were never an empty exaggeration. Moving quickly, he dodges the blows with superhuman and precise agility. Feeling the limit, he realizes his current Search Knight body is screaming. Accumulating mana, the true dragon's energy begins to weigh on his muscles. Ignoring the pain, he focuses only on the battle and the sensation of the power flowing. The noise vanishing, the world around him falls silent, leaving only him and his opponent. Noticing the attack, he sees the enemy's sword coming in slow motion towards him. Finding his body strange, he feels his movements can't keep up with his quick mind. Recalling the past, the sensation of battle transports him to his previous life. Focusing on the target, his eyes glow with the intense blue flame of his power. Dodging by a hair, he barely scrapes past the blade of the knight attacking him. Striking with force, he releases a shockwave that throws the enemy far away. Panting heavily, he wipes the sweat from his face, feeling fatigue dominate his body. Shouting loudly, he calls for the next opponent, challenging anyone to face him now. Crossing weapons, he blocks a heavy attack with his worn wooden sword. Facing the enemy, he maintains absolute focus, ignoring physical exhaustion. Spinning his body, he counterattacks with a fluid movement enveloped in blue mana. Taking the impact, he feels the force of the blow but doesn't retreat an inch. Pushing back, he uses the energy to repel the knight with violence. Cutting through the air, his blade moves too fast to be followed by the eyes. Dodging on reflex, he narrowly avoids being hit, showing his skill. Looking coldly, he intimidates his adversary with just the intensity of his gaze. Leaning on his sword, he takes a deep breath, trying to catch his breath after the battle. Surrounded by bodies, he remains standing in the center of the courtyard like a lone victor. Smiling tiredly, he sees that he has finally commanded respect in that place. Shouting in shock, the soldiers announce that he has won 77 consecutive fights. Enveloped in light, the blue aura explodes around him, promising even more power. Feeling the advancement, the energy concentrates, and he reaches the fourth ring with a boom of power. Expanding the aura, the blue mana floods the entire courtyard with overwhelming pressure. Observing the glow, he realizes his body is finally adapting to the magic. Falling to his knees, exhaustion suddenly hits him, making his legs give way. Taking a deep breath, he tries to stay conscious as the world spins around him. Rushing over, concerned, Commander Elias supports the prince before he faints. Asking about his condition, he wants to know if his highness is injured or just tired. Thanking him for the help, our protagonist says he just needs a moment to recover. Praising his strength, Elias admits he has never seen anyone fight that way before. Acknowledging his worth, all the knights look at him with respect and admiration. Getting up slowly, he leans on the commander's shoulder, showing gratitude. Smiling weakly, he asks if that was enough to prove his point. Agreeing seriously, Elias says he surpassed all possible expectations there. Looking around, he sees that he has won not only victory but also their loyalty. Coming back to reality, he realizes he overdid it and will pay the price with aches and pains later. Reflecting on honor, he realizes that the spirit of knights never really changes. Respecting strength, he admires how they accept victory and defeat with the same dignity. Preparing for departure, the procession organizes the carriages to leave the fortress. Bidding farewell to all, he says he hopes to see them again in the near future. Wishing them well, he asks the count and the others to take care until their next meeting. Calling for the baron, he asks for one last important favor before leaving. Asking for secrecy, he requests that everything that happened during his stay remain a secret. Questioning the reason, the man thinks that revealing such strength would help humanity. Revealing the plan, he confesses with a mischievous smile that he wants to surprise someone specific. Camping in the forest, the group decides to stop and rest under the vibrant sunset. Offering protection, Kars says he will check the surroundings to ensure safety. Fixing her gaze, Arwen watches the prince in silence, seeming to want to say something. Commenting on his adaptation, she notes that he has adjusted to the wild life too quickly. Yawning sleepily, he admits he's exhausted and never imagined he could last this long. Entering the tent, Adelia asks for leave to speak alone with her master for a moment. Advising his student, he tells Adelia to sleep in the carriage where it's more comfortable. Refusing the offer, she insists on staying close in case he needs anything. Lying on the bed, he throws himself down tired, feeling every muscle in his body complain. Reflecting on the day, he thinks that the Order of the Iron Lion was not what he expected. Analyzing their strength, he realizes that not even the authority of the Leonberger surpasses the sword expert. Comparing levels, he knows that most there barely reached the swordmaster level. Remembering the past, he recalls how difficult it was for someone to reach that level. Criticizing his uncle, he thinks that Bale and the others wasted immense potential. Recognizing their talent, he sees that they have superhuman abilities beyond measure. Lamenting the mistake, he realizes his uncle abandoned his own talent out of fear or laziness. Holding the world, he thinks that in this era, everything flows differently. Deciding on his focus, he resolves not to make the same mistakes as in his past life. Feeling determined, he clenches his fist, promising to start from scratch if necessary. Interrupting his thoughts, Bale enters the tent, asking if he's going to sleep already. Encouraging his uncle, he says it's never too late to start chasing your dreams. Praising the feat, Bale says his nephew has already won the heart of the Iron Lion. Comparing the brothers, he affirms that the other princes would never act so freely. Trembling with fright, our protagonist doesn't understand what has gotten into his uncle all of a sudden. Shouting nervously, he asks if the old man has lost his mind, talking so strangely. Denying the assumption, he says he's not talking about the bet against the three princes. Recalling the agreement, he mentions that the bet was to defeat a double chain knight. Showing the scene, the image recalls the moment he easily defeated Francis. Concluding the fact, Bale says that in reality, he has already won the bet they made before. Kneeling solemnly, the uncle decides to honor the promise made at that decisive moment. Swearing loyalty, Ballhard promises to serve the first prince as his faithful vassal. Declaring his support, he commits to using the full strength of the Third Legion for him. Panicking, our protagonist shouts, asking what on earth all of this is. Remembering the request, he says he only asked his uncle to trust him and nothing more. Rejecting the idea, he bellows that he never said he wanted to take the cursed throne. Celebrating his return, the castle receives the prince with a commotion worthy of a king. Complaining about the chaos, he finds himself surrounded by maids and helpers on all sides. Finding himself at the center, he realizes he has become the focus of all that infernal commotion. Shouting orders, he commands everyone to be sent away from that place immediately. Pleading for peace, he begs them to hide all those people far from his sight. Observing from a distance, the guards find the prince's behavior charming. Sighing with relief, he finally gets a moment of well-deserved silence in his room. Bursting open the door, the third prince invades the chamber, shouting loudly. Announcing his arrival, he says mockingly that his older brother has finally returned. Taunting subtly, he comments that his brother looks well for someone who has been missing. Retorting in kind, our protagonist asks who is clinging to whom there. Accusing him of treason, the third prince says he gathered forces behind everyone's backs. Cursing furiously, he promises his brother will pay dearly for deceiving him that way. Ignoring the threat, he tiredly repeats that he couldn't care less about the throne or power. Sighing deeply, he knows that now no one will believe his sincere words. Calling his uncle, he asks Bale to stop being so formal and relax a bit. Explaining honor, Bale says that Ballhard is the shield that protects the kingdom from the monsters of the north. Warning his nephew, he advises that if he acts like a king, the shield will move for him. Reflecting on the wait, Bale says it's only a matter of time before he is forced to fight. Guaranteeing his help, he promises not to let anyone lay a finger on his dear nephew. Leaving the room, Bale leaves a final warning for him to mark his words well. Thinking alone, our protagonist reflects that the life of a first prince is never easy. Feeling tired, he wishes that nothing troublesome would happen for a good while now. Remembering his goal, he just wants to finish off the threat quickly so he can rest in peace. Focusing on power, he knows he needs to become strong enough to crush anyone. Illuminating the hall, the giant chandelier shines over the nobles gathered for the party. Entering triumphantly, King Lionel Leonberger arrives at the banquet with his imposing presence. Announcing the herald calls for first Prince Idol Leonberger to enter. Observing the crowd, he sees the curious and envious faces of all the nobles there. Revealing the figures, the other princes and important figures make their presence known at the party. Facing his father, our protagonist exchanges a meaningful look with the king on the throne.